Chapter 1244. With the large amount of money and weapons stored in the city, the only thing they lacked was a lack of manpower. Since the lack of soldiers was alleviated, there was nothing for him to worry about. However, the battle at the Ala Mountain Pass involved too many forces. If the situation wasn't handled properly, the five-star army would be defeated. Then, they would have no choice but to withdraw from this place. If they wanted to enter the Ala Mountain Pass again, they would need a lot of time to prepare. Looking at the Ala Mountain Pass marked with a red flag on the sand table, Yang Chendong frowned. Even the 1st Cavalry Division would not be able to break through the encirclement of 80,000 soldiers with less than 20,000 soldiers, not to mention supporting the other allies. Naturally, Yang Chendong was not worried about the 1st Cavalry Division. He had already prepared and given orders. However, it was not realistic to expect them to support the other allies. But what if another force suddenly appeared? What would it be like if they worked together with the other allies? Yang Chendong thought as he looked at Hak Seri City to the north of the Ala Mountain Pass. If he remembered correctly, Bai Shuang's 4th Cavalry Division was there. Perhaps. Hak Seri City. In the past half a month, Bai Shuang's injuries had already healed. Not only that, but he had also gained a lot of weight. This was naturally closely related to the care of his new wife, Ruofang. If there was a woman who cared about him all the time and made him nutritious meals for every meal, it would be hard for a man not to get fat. With power in his hands, in charge of the famous 4th Cavalry Division, and with a beautiful wife by his side, Bai Shuang was living a godlike life. However, his peaceful life did not extinguish his will to fight. He clearly remembered his identity, and he was even more aware that the world was not yet settled, and there were even more important missions waiting for him. "Husband, it's time to eat." Ruofang appeared in the study with delicious food in front of Bai Shuang. After the food was placed on the table, Bai Shuang reached out and held Ruofang's delicate wrist. With a gentle gaze, he said, "It's been hard on you." "It's not hard at all. I like this kind of life." Ruofang's face carried a faint smile and satisfaction. "I also like the feeling of being with you." Bai Shuang sighed. However, his expression suddenly changed as he said, "But just now, a messenger sent word that the reserve force that would replace his 4th line in Haksari had arrived. This also indicated that his comfortable life was about to come to an end." When he thought about the main force of the division that was surrounded, White Shuang felt a heavy responsibility on his shoulders. However, before Bai Shuang could say anything, Ruofang had already opened her mouth and said, "A good man should be ambitious. My man should not only accompany his wife. The battlefield is where he can show his talent. I know that the person who will replace my husband has come. You should do what you should do. I will also leave here and return to the 1st city to wait for your return." After all, she had worked for the CIA before, so she had her own sources of information. Naturally, she was very clear about what happened in Hobak Seri. Because of this, she also knew that it was time for the husband and wife to separate. Originally, Ruofang was the leader of the CIA in charge of intelligence work in this area. However, because she married Bai Shuang, this responsibility naturally had to be relieved. This was also the rule that Yang Chendong had set before. If the husband and wife both worked in important departments, not only would they not be able to take care of their family, but they might also form their own forces. This was not something that Yang Chendong wanted to see. In order to prevent this from happening, the moment Ruofang married Bai Shuang, she was destined to become a woman behind a man. She was destined to be a woman who could not be seen in public anymore. "Thank you. Don't worry, I will definitely kill more enemies on the battlefield." Bai Shuang was touched by his wife's understanding. For this trust and waiting, he had to perform well. Just one night later, Bai Shuang led the 4th line of 4,000 cavalrymen, and left Hobok Seri without anyone knowing. Because they left in the middle of the night, no one was alerted. Even the spies in the city arranged by the 5 nations did not notice this. When they woke up the next morning, the reserve force that replaced Bai Shuang in charge of Hobok Seri's security was still under the banner of the 4th line. After leaving Hobok Seri, Bai Shuang led the 4,000 cavalrymen across the snowy land. Their target was the 30,000 cavalrymen led by Turpan Tushi. They did not approach the 1st Cavalry Division. Instead, they chose to attack the 30,000 cavalrymen of Turpan first. This was the order that Yang Qindong gave to Bai Shuang. It was true that the 1st Cavalry Division had unparalleled battle prowess, but they were surrounded by 80,000 soldiers. Furthermore, they were under the command of the old General Teng Mushi. Even if Bai Shuang brought 4,000 cavalry with him, he would not be able to do much. The intelligence department had already reported Teng Mushi's information. He was an old man who was over 70 years old. In that era, he was definitely an old man. For Ili to send him out, it was enough to show the importance of this battle. According to the information, Teng Mushi had been idle at home due to his age and was preparing to retire. However, this time, due to the importance of this matter, not only did Prime Minister Arab personally go to invite him, even the king of Balide personally went to invite him. It was because of Teng Mushi's appearance that Yang Qindong placed so much importance on him. It was also because he knew that Teng Mushi liked to be conservative in battle. He liked to talk about losing before he won. Yang Qindong was not worried about letting 80,000 people surround the 1st Cavalry Division. With Teng Mushi's many years of experience, he would not take risks. Unless the 1st Cavalry Division took the initiative to break out of the encirclement, the possibility of Ili attacking first was very low. Since Teng Mushi liked to play it safe, Yang Qindong allowed the 1st Cavalry Division to not move. They could also use this chance to tie down the 80,000 steel cavalry. Since they could not fight at the Ala Mountain Pass, Bai Shuang's orders were to work with Dai Qua of the Far Eastern Army's 1st Cavalry Division to deal with the 30,000 steel cavalry of Turpan. The Turpan cavalry following behind Dai Qua did not know that they had become the target of others. They continued to follow their opponents closely, watching their every move. Tushi, who was leading the troops, was already grumbling about this. Their Turpan country was strong in the past, although they were not the absolute leader of Ili and Yarkiang. In terms of military strength, who dared to say that they were better than them? But even so, when faced with the 5-star army, they had lost 2 important cities besieged, Bali and Turpan, one of which was their capital. After 2 battles, the morale of the Turpan army was low. They needed a big battle to boost their morale. This time, the Tushi general who received the military order secretly swore before setting off that he would perform well this time and become the first general in the Turpan kingdom to defeat a 5-star army. For this, he was confident that once they reached the agreed-upon location, he would launch a fierce attack. However, what made Tushi depressed was that his target, the Liaodong Army's 1st Cavalry Division, which he saw as a thorn in his side, was moving so slowly that he was losing his patience. If it was just moving slowly, it would be fine. However, he could not stand the fact that they kept stopping. Originally, it was only a distance of 700 li. If the cavalry traveled on foot, it would only take 2 to 3 days. However, after half a month, they had only traveled 500 li. This made Tushi wonder more than once whether the other party was here to fight a war or to go sightseeing. Did he really want to help the world's #1 cavalry division, or was he afraid of death and did not move forward? Not knowing what the 1st Cavalry Division wanted to do, Tushi's eyes burned with anger. However, For the sake of the overall situation, he could only force himself to endure. He had no choice but to endure. Before he came, King Haddenbar had given him a strict order. Unless the five-star army took the initiative to attack, they could not take the initiative to attack until they were near the Ayla mountain pass. Since he could not fight, he could only follow. Thus, Tushi endured along the way. However, when they were less than 200 li from their destination, the other parties stopped again. This time, they stopped for a full 3 days. This made him so depressed that he wanted to bang his head against the wall. How the hell were they here to fight? They were clearly strolling faster than him. They stopped for a full 3 days. Tushi was annoyed for 3 days. Every day, when the scout appeared, he was looking forward to the good news of the other party's departure. However, day after day, he was disappointed. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, the scout came to his tent again. He knelt on the ground and reported the battle situation. What's wrong? There are still no signs of the other party. Leaving? Sitting on the big chair, Tushi leaned his body sideways and looked like he was about to fall asleep. Yes. The scout answered truthfully. All right, let's scout again. The result was as expected. Tushi immediately felt bored and waved his hand to dismiss the scout. However, after the signal was made, the scout did not withdraw. Instead, he continued to kneel there. This caused Tushi to be unhappy. Why haven't you left yet? Did you discover something new? The last sentence was naturally said casually. However, he did not expect the scout to nod there. I did discover something, but I can't confirm it yet. That's why I didn't dare to report it. Hearing that there really was a new discovery, Tushi was also interested. He raised his voice. Speak. Your words are innocent. The scout was waiting for this sentence. Immediately, he seemed to be much more spirited as he said, General, according to this general's observation, something important seems to have happened to this 5-star Corps cavalry. That's why they stopped moving forward. Chapter 1245. Important matter? What is it? Tushi didn't understand and asked back. Yes, I accidentally saw white silk hanging in their main tent today. The scout paused for a moment. Although he didn't have absolute confidence, he believed in the brilliance he saw at that moment. Therefore, he gritted his teeth and reported it. What? Suddenly, Tushi sat up straight, his eyes wide open. You say that again. Tushi's reaction gave the scout a fright, but he still suppressed the trembling in his heart and said, I inadvertently saw that the inside of the other side's main tent was hung with white silk. White silk, white silk. This time, he heard it clearly. Tushi fell into deep thought. From what he knew, there were only 2 places where white silk was hung. One was the place where cloth was produced, and the other was the place where people died. The first answer wouldn't appear on the battlefield. Could it be the second answer? It even appeared in the main tent. Didn't this mean that the general of the 5-star army met with an accident, and it was very likely that someone died? If it was said that a general who died on the battlefield didn't know anything, it was just like how Zhu Di, the founder of the great Ming dynasty, died on the grasslands. After all, the conditions for marching and fighting were not very good. If one accidentally contracted a disease, it was very likely that there would be problems due to not being treated in time. Otherwise, the Han people wouldn't have said that they died before they were born. If the general of the 5-star army had died in an accident, then it would be understandable why they had to stop all the time and even stay in a place that wasn't a battlefield for 3 days. Perhaps the reason why they stopped was because the general was sick, so they had no choice but to slow down. As for why they stopped completely, wasn't it because the general was dead and there was no one to take charge of the situation? Thinking back to the information he received, the army he was following came from Liaodong, which was thousands of miles away from here. The living environment there was very different. so the probability of getting sick was naturally much higher. Only this could explain the abnormal behavior of the five-star army these days. Ha 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 ha. As if he had finally figured it out, Tushi laughed heartily. He never thought that such a good thing would fall on him. Originally, he had the advantage in terms of military strength. Now that the enemy's commander was dead, wouldn't it be a mess? If he suddenly attacked at this time, the enemy would definitely not be able to withstand a single blow, and victory would be right in front of him. At this time, Tushi was completely excited by this information that had yet to be confirmed. He was now thinking of only one thing, which was to win the battle and make a great contribution. After an unknown amount of time, Tushi finally stopped laughing. Then he looked at the scout and said, "Good, good. This time you have made a great contribution. Immediately inform the other soldiers to come here for a meeting." Seeing that Tushi seemed to have made a decision, the scout asked with a guilty conscience, "General, are you going to attack?" "Of course." "Is there any other problem?" Tushi asked unhappily. "No, this general was just thinking whether or not we should inform the king of such a big matter." The scout didn't dare to be completely sure of his information. If everything was fake, then wouldn't he have to bear the crime of making a false report? Inform the king? How long will this round trip take? If that's really the case, I'm afraid that the opportunity will be long gone. The five-star army will also choose a new general to lead them. Tushi shook his head. Although he knew that making a move now would violate the orders given to him by the king, he still decided to take the risk and attack when he thought about how the king's orders were not given. All right, this general has made up his mind. Also, so what if this information is fake? We have 30,000 cavalry, and the enemy doesn't even have 10,000 men. How can they be a match for us? Quickly go and pass on the order. These words dispelled the doubts in the scout's heart. That's right, the general had 30,000 soldiers. Their military strength was 3 times that of the enemy, and they had taken the initiative to launch a sneak attack. How could they possibly win this battle? And once they won, wouldn't he also make a great contribution? At that moment, he didn't have any doubts and turned around to pass on the order. Not long after, all the junior generals arrived at the main tent. When Tushi announced that the five-star army's general had died, and the scout beside him confirmed this information with a confident tone, all the junior generals became excited. If there was a chance to win the battle and great contributions were within reach, who would refuse? An hour later, a new and temporary plan to sneak into the camp was born. After the junior generals received the new order, they all excitedly walked out of the main tent. However, they didn't know that their every move was clearly seen by the scouts of the five-star army. Time slowly passed. Under Tushi's orders, the 30,000 cavalry ate their dinner earlier than usual, and then waited for a long time for the sky to turn dark. This situation was also discovered by the scouts of the five-star army. They reported the situation back one by one. A great battle was about to break out. That night, the east wind was 4 to 5. The biting cold wind was like a knife when it blew on people's faces. When the time came, Tushi, dressed in a suit of general armor, walked out of the tent. When he felt the chill of the cold wind, he couldn't help but laugh heartily. Good, good, the heavens are helping me. This kind of wind is just right to cover our army's movements at night. I order all the generals to be merciless when they approach the enemy camp. Whoever fights the best, this general will ask for a reward in front of His Majesty. Tushi's order quickly spread throughout the army. The generals in charge of the sneak attack all revealed happy expressions. They all seemed to have seen a great merit in front of them. Set out. With a wave of his hand, Tushi led a total of 25,000 cavalry out of the main tent. Only 5,000 cavalry were left behind to watch over the money and provisions. This was enough to prove how imperative this battle was and how confident they were. 25,000 cavalrymen were split into 5 groups, with 5,000 men in a group. This time, in order to achieve the goal of completely wiping out the 5-star army, Tushi had even sent troops to surround the enemy's retreat. In short, he wanted to create a huge victory and wash away the rumors that the Turfan army was inferior to the 5-star army. They walked through the snow. A large number of black figures constantly approached the 1st Cavalry Division's main camp. Even though the snow made it difficult to travel, no one retreated. Their war horses moved as fast as they could. When they were less than 5 li away from the 5-star army's main camp, they still didn't see any of their own cavalry scouts. However, the army still didn't have any intention of stopping. At this time, it was like an arrow on a bow that had to be released. With the advantage in numbers, Tushi was confident that even if the enemy was prepared, the final victory would still be his. For li, 3 li, 2 li, they could already see the tent fire in the 5-star army's main camp. They could even see the silhouettes of the soldiers in the tent. Tushi shouted, "All troops charge!" Immediately, the sound of the cavalry sounded like an earthquake. Other than the 10,000 cavalry outside, the other 3 groups of 15,000 cavalry charged towards the 5-star army's main camp from 3 different directions. At this moment, each of them had a ferocious expression on their faces. They waved their sabers and passed through the layers of obstacles under the snow. They surged through the tall piles of snow that the 5-star army had built beforehand and charged into the main camp. When they were 100 meters away, a wave of cavalry archers shot out arrows. Immediately, some of the soldiers on the platform were hit by the arrows. They didn't have any intention of resisting. The Turpan cavalry successfully entered the 5-star army's main camp. What's going on? There wasn't a trace of resistance. It also wasn't as chaotic as he imagined when the 5-star army was ambushed at night. General Tushi had a bad feeling. Everything was going too smoothly. It was so smooth that it made him feel that this wasn't an enemy camp, but a dead camp. Kill! The Turpan Kiliarchs who wanted to gain merit all shouted as they charged towards the nearest 5-star army's main camp. When they opened the tent with murderous looks on their faces, all they saw was an empty military camp. Of course, not all barracks were empty. For example, some barracks had some rice dummies made of grass standing there, although they were very crude. For some reason, they gave off a feeling that they were laughing at themselves for being fooled. Not good. We fell into a trap. Some of the Kiliarchs who reacted quickly realized that something was wrong and immediately retreated out of the tent. However, it was too late to leave now. Arrows covered the sky and fell like rain, landing in the middle of the Turpan cavalry who were about to retreat. Some of the arrows landed on the tents, causing a huge fire to burn. The fire borrowed the strength of the wind and instantly turned the entire camp into a sea of fire. The Turpan cavalry, who were filled with killing intent a moment ago, were like ants on a hot pan. They were instantly thrown into chaos. Shouts, howls, and even cries filled the air. At this moment, killing was the main theme, and blood was the melody. In the darkness of the night, countless 5-star soldiers appeared from all directions with bows and arrows in their hands. In just 2 shots, who knew how many Turban cavalry were killed or injured, causing the enemy to fall into chaos and lose their direction of battle. Steady, steady, head to the east. There are 2 regiments of 10,000 cavalry there. Meet up with them. Knowing that he had been fooled, the Tushi general's face turned ugly, especially when he saw that many of his men had been killed in such a short period of time. He hated those bows and arrows even more. These despicable Han people are playing with fire. Immediately break out of the encirclement, regroup with the main force, and counterattack. Tushi roared angrily, but at this moment, why didn't he think about himself? Was his sneak attack really honorable? In comparison, he was just more despicable. Chapter 1246. The originally chaotic situation gradually stabilized due to Tushi's shouts. The army began to move towards the east. They wanted to join up with the 10,000 cavalrymen outside before launching a counterattack. However, they didn't know that the situation in the east wasn't any better than them. The 5,000 turban cavalrymen, who were in charge of the detour, were being chased by the 5-star army. The ones chasing after them were the 1st Cavalry Division's 4th Regiment, by Shuang's troops. Stopping for 3 days, hanging white silk in the main tent, those were just a ploy to lure the turban army out. From the looks of it, everything was successful. Tushi, who wanted to gain merit, didn't wait for them to reach their destination before making his move. However, the 5-star army had already expected this kind of sneak attack. After a discussion between Bai Shuang and Dai Qua, they decided to beat the enemy at their own game. The final result of the discussion was that Dai Ku would be in charge of burning the turban cavalrymen who charged into the camp, while Bai Shuang would be in charge of destroying the surrounding troops. Right now, Bai Shuang was carrying out his plan. In front of him was a large pit filled with Turkmen cavalry. Before the rest of the enemy cavalry could figure out what was going on, they were surrounded by 4 groups of godlike cavalry. First, they were killed by a volley of arrows, followed by a close-range charge. The general didn't know the soldiers, and the soldiers didn't know the general. With just a wave of attacks, the 5,000 turban cavalrymen were completely disoriented. The number of soldiers was also rapidly decreasing. Very soon, the 4th Regiment had completely taken the initiative in terms of military strength. One could imagine that the next step would be a one-sided massacre. As for Tushi, at this moment, he was trying his best to charge outwards under the long-range attacks of the archers. Until now, they had not even seen the shadow of a single 5-star army cavalry. All they had encountered were arrows that came from all directions, filling the sky with deadly arrows. When they charged in, they had to cross over piles of snow that were close to a person's height. When they left, it was the same. It was precisely because of the appearance of these snow piles that countless cavalrymen fell here. Seeing the number of soldiers around him decreasing, Tushi was burning with anxiety. At this moment, he only wanted to join the cavalry army in the east because he firmly believed that he still had the advantage in terms of numbers. Finally, after paying an unknown price and losing an unknown number of warriors, the snow piles were pushed to the ground one by one. Tushi, under the protection of a group of personal guards, followed the main force and killed their way out. In the distance, he finally saw the 5,000 cavalry stopped at a distance of 5 miles. "General, what's going on?" the Turpan Chiliarch asked with a look of surprise on his face. Originally, they thought that the people who escaped from here would be the defeated soldiers of the 5-star army. They never thought that it would be their own people. If it wasn't for his good eyesight, they would have killed each other just now. "Don't mention it." Tushi gasped for breath, and with a look of relief on his face, he said, "We've been tricked. This is an empty camp. The 5-star army knew that we would come." What should we do? He didn't expect this to be the enemy's plan. For a moment, the Kiliarch's face was filled with shock. He didn't know what to do and even panicked. "What are you afraid of?" Seeing the panicked look on the Kiliarch's face, Tushi was furious. "Don't forget that even if we were ambushed, we still have the advantage in numbers. How about this? Let's immediately join up with the other team and kill our way back. I'd like to see how the 5-star Corps, whose numbers are inferior to ours, will be wiped out by us in a real battle." Tushi was indeed very angry. He brought 30,000 cavalrymen, but couldn't defeat the 5-star army, which had less than 10,000 cavalrymen. This made him feel great shame. While his heart was burning with anger, more than 100 cavalrymen escaped from the distance. Because it was dark, both sides couldn't see very clearly. However, a loud shout came from the Turpan army. "Who are you people?" The cavalrymen on the opposite side, who seemed like they could escape at any time, crazily rushed over while shouting, "We are on the same side, on the same side." They were indeed on the same side. They were the deserters from the 5,000 cavalrymen who were defeated by the sudden appearance of the White Shuang 4th Regiment. The arrival of these people told Tushi that his army had once again suffered a heavy blow. At this time, of the 25,000 cavalrymen he had brought with him, there were only about 10,000 left. Perhaps there should be some fleeing cavalrymen nearby, but in any case, in terms of numbers, he no longer had any advantage. "General, are we still going to kill our way back?" After losing another 5,000 cavalrymen, a Chiliarch in the army asked Tushi with a trace of uncertainty. At this time, Tushi's face was very ugly, and the muscles on his face were trembling from time to time. He knew that he had suffered such a big loss. So, of course, he wanted to immediately kill his way back. However, considering the current turmoil in the army and the fact that he didn't know how many 5-star army cavalrymen he would have to face, there were too many uncertainties if he went back now. For a gentleman to take revenge, 10 years is not too late. Reason prevailed over anger, and in the end, Tushi suppressed the killing intent in his heart and said, "Retreat, let's return to the main camp first, and then discuss further. These 5-star army can't escape." Tushi didn't forget that he still had 5,000 cavalrymen left in the main camp. If he met up with them and gathered some of the defeated soldiers, his strength still couldn't be underestimated. But he never thought that at this time, his main camp was already a sea of fire. Just a quarter of an hour after Tushi left with his 25,000 cavalrymen, a 5-star army appeared like divine soldiers. They were completely unprepared and didn't even think that someone would attack them. In just an hour, other than 500 cavalrymen who escaped, the rest were either killed or captured. At the same time, the money and provisions they left in the army were all given to the Dingshan reconnaissance group, who was in charge of Tushi. The ones who suddenly appeared here were the Dingshan reconnaissance group that followed closely behind. Originally, his and Ma Xiangshan's light cavalry were being chased by the 30,000 cavalrymen of the Yirkiang kingdom. In front of them were 30,000 Turpan cavalrymen, and behind them were 30,000 Yirkiang cavalrymen. This group of only 10,000 people seemed to be in danger of being attacked from both sides at any time. In the eyes of ordinary people, these two groups of 10,000 cavalrymen should be walking on thin ice with every step they took. But unexpectedly, they actually chose to take the initiative to attack. With the help of the telegram, this technology that was definitely ahead of the times, Yang Chendong, who was far away in Turpan, organized this large meeting and achieved the goal of heavily injuring the 30,000 Turpan cavalrymen. And this was just the beginning, because Yang Chendong's next target was the Yirkiang kingdom's 30,000 cavalrymen. This would be their second target. Before the news of the rapid defeat of Tushi's troops spread, Yang Chendong sent another order in the telegram. In the night, by Shuang's 4th Regiment, Dai Qua's 1st Cavalry Division and Dingshan's reconnaissance group began to merge together. Then, an encirclement began to form, waiting for the enemy to fall into the trap. Dingshan's reconnaissance group left first, leaving all of the heavy responsibility to the light cavalry commander Ma Xiangshan. In this regard, not only did he not feel fear, on the contrary, he was full of fighting spirit. Since it was called a light cavalry division, it could naturally develop the cavalry's speed to the extreme. Just based on this point, Ma Xiangshan did not put the 3 Yirkiang armies behind him in his eyes. It was to the extent that if he wanted to, he could disappear from the enemy's line of sight at any time. But for the sake of the big picture, Ma Xiangshan did not do this. Not only that, he also deliberately slowed down his pace, and also deliberately spread the news of Dingshan's reconnaissance group leaving. Just like Tushi, Yirqiang's Aleifu also received the order to closely follow the five-star army in front of him, waiting for them to arrive at the Ala Mountain Pass to launch a large-scale battle. It was precisely because of this order that although the five-star army in front of him was not fast, Aleifu was not in a hurry. Wasn't the enemy advancing towards the target set by his side? Since this was the case, it was enough. In Aleifu's eyes, the 10,000 five-star army cavalry in front of him were already turtles in a jar. He only needed to wait for a while, and when they arrived at the designated location, it would be time to destroy them. Just as Aleifu brought the 30,000 cavalry and maintained a certain distance behind the 10,000 five-star army cavalry, a piece of news suddenly reached his ears. The target he was closely following had changed from 10,000 to 5,000, and there were still 5,000 who were missing. Where did they go? Did they escape? Or do they have other missions? Aleifu did not know anything about all of this. This was not because he was careless, but because the 10,000 five-star army cavalry he was watching were all quite strong. Regardless of whether it was the scouting group or the cavalry, they all had powerful anti-reconnaissance abilities. Once a scout left the main force and approached them, it would often be like a stone sinking into the sea without any news. In addition, apart from the Ala Mountain Pass, there were no other important cities nearby. Over time, in order to reduce unnecessary losses, Aleifu did not send people to watch the enemy. It was because of this that Aleifu was half a beat late in receiving the news of the scouting group's disappearance. After learning that the enemy had actually lost half of their men, Aleifu had a bad feeling in his heart. On the battlefield, any change could have an extremely important impact, not to mention the disappearance of 5,000 cavalry. No, I can't let the situation become even more complicated. Aleifu was afraid that the change in front of him would affect the overall situation, so he decided to abandon his previous plan and take action in advance. As long as the 5,000-strong cavalry of the Fifth Star Army was wiped out, it would be equivalent to dealing a heavy blow to the Fifth Star Army. This way, there would be a change in the military strength of both sides. In this way, even the 5,000-strong cavalry hidden in the shadows would be of little use. Chapter 1247. Order all the captains and Qian madams to speed up the march and catch up to the five-star army cavalry in front, surround them and destroy them. Aleifu also made the decision to change the plan. On this point, he made the same choice as General Tushi. And it was this method that caused him to fall into eternal damnation, with their superior military strength. If they followed the plan, it would be very difficult for the five-star army to seriously injure them and defeat them on the battlefield. Even if the five-star army cavalry was stronger, the lack of numbers was always a problem. On the other hand, once the cavalry of the five-star army moved, they would reveal countless openings, and there would be the possibility of them being caught and attacked head-on. The 30,000 Yirqiang cavalry had long been annoyed. Following the enemy all the way, it was obvious that they were stronger and could not attack. It was like a hungry person with delicious food in front of them that they could not eat. That kind of feeling was really unpleasant. Now it was good. They could finally attack. Each one of them vented out the fire that had been suppressed along the way. For a moment, the 10 battalions, with each battalion having 3,000 people, began to chase the new light cavalry 20 miles ahead, as if they were in a race. Aleifu did not stop the battalions from chasing instead of fighting together. On the contrary, he was happy to see all of this. In his view, this was the strongest morale of the army. The Kiliarchs under him wanted to perform meritorious deeds. As the main general, He had no reason to stop them. If 30,000 cavalry walked together, it would not be easy to eat them. But if the army was divided into 10, it was completely different. They were destined to regret splitting their military strength. 20 miles ahead of the light cavalry regiment. When the Yirkiang cavalry behind them began a fierce chase, Ma Xiangshan, as the regiment commander, quickly received the news. However, he wasn't in a hurry. Instead, he said to the battalion commanders below, "Wait a moment. We'll retreat when they get closer. Otherwise, I'm really worried that they won't be able to catch up to us if we leave now." Ha ha ha. The 12 battalion commanders under him all had a face full of laughter. This was also because they had full confidence in their speed. If they did not have enough speed, they would not be called a light cavalry regiment. 15 li, 10 li, 8 li, 5 li. Soon, when the distance between the two sides was less than 5 miles, the light cavalry regiment moved. They seemed to have just discovered their pursuers and began to flee towards the Ala mountain pass. When Aleifu heard the movement of the 5,000 five-star Army's cavalry, he looked up at the sky and saw that the sun had risen to its highest point. He chuckled and said, "It's noon now. If there are no accidents, the 5-star Army will collide with the Turpan Kingdom's Tushi general by nightfall. We have 60,000 people in total, while the other side only has 5,000. Aya, it's really not enough to kill." "Haha, you're right, General. It's just that we still have to speed up. We can't give the credit to the Turpan Army." A Madame Qian chimed in with a laugh, voicing her concerns. Of course, he couldn't give the benefits to Tushi. How about this? Give the order to speed up and strive for the greatest credit. Also, I don't want these 5,000 five-star Army's cavalry to see the sun rise tomorrow. Since they were fleeing towards the Ala mountain pass, Aleifu had nothing to worry about. The entire way was filled with the cavalry of the 5-star Army. He really could not think of any dangers. If there was a possibility, it would be that their contributions might be snatched away by others. Aleifu was extremely confident. However, if he knew that the Tushi general's army of 30,000 had suffered heavy losses and was currently fleeing like stray dogs, he would not be so confident. Instead, he would immediately order the army to gather and assume a defensive stance. The battle that had happened a few hours ago did not have a powerful means of communication like the radio. Aleifu walked step by step towards the trap set by Yang Qindong. The pursuit began. On one side, there were 5,000 light cavalry soldiers with the 5-star flag. On the other side, there were 10 battalions of Yirkiang cavalry with 3,000 people in each battalion. They stepped through the snow and galloped north of the Heavenly Mountain on the road to the Ala mountain pass. Under Ma Xiangshan's intentional control, the pursuers behind them maintained a distance of about 5 li, neither more nor less. This was a distance that filled people with hope, but at the same time, it was also a distance that filled people with despair. As the two sides continued to run, the sun set from the sky, and the sky gradually darkened. However, this did not stop the pursuers behind them from stopping. This was because they knew that if they continued to run forward, they would run into the 30,000 Turkmen cavalry. If they were too far away, the credit of taking down the 5-star Army's cavalry would not be theirs. Of course, they did not know that the Yirkiang cavalry thought that they would meet up with the Turkmen cavalry, but in reality, what awaited them was a well-designed trap. The battle that had defeated the 30,000 Turkmen cavalry last night had already ended at daybreak. At this moment, the 10,000 5-star Army cavalry that had rested for an entire day were waiting for their prey to enter the trap. "They're here, they're here." There were already scouts running over to report to Dai Qua, Baishuang, and Ding Shan. Prepare to attack. When the three commanders received the news, their eyes couldn't help but light up. This was the light of excitement before a big battle, filled with confidence. Ma Xiangshan was still running ahead, but if one looked closer, they would discover that their formation was not the slightest bit messed up. From this, it could be seen that their current speed was not their limit. It's about time. Inform everyone to prepare for a counterattack at any time. Seeing that the sky had completely darkened, Ma Xiangshan's mouth revealed a smile. According to the plan, the time for the counterattack was about to arrive. This time, he must kill his way back and teach the Yi Erqiang cavalry, who had been chasing him for a few hours, a lesson. The 30,000 Yirqiang cavalry were completely unaware of all this as they continued to pursue. Some of them were extremely anxious, worried that the Yirqiang cavalry would snatch the credit. If that happened, their half a day of pursuit would be meaningless. In order to snatch the credit, some of them did not even hesitate to overdraft the speed of their war horses to get as close to their target as possible. They've stopped. Unknowingly, a scout's shout came from the front. This shout caused the pursuing Yirqiang cavalry to tremble. They believed that the 5-star army cavalry must have seen the Turpan cavalry camp and stopped. If that was the case, they were afraid that there was no door to heaven and no road to hell. Haha, warriors, follow me and attack. In a very short period of time, the pursuing Yirqiang cavalry gave the order to attack with all their might. One by one, the war horses rushed forward at their fastest speed, afraid that they would not be able to do anything and would not be able to get any credit. Come on, the faster you charge, the weaker your war horses will be when you run later. Ha ha ha. At this time, Ma Xiangshan had already ordered the troops to stop and get into formation. The soldiers were all armed with bows and crossbows, ready to counterattack at any time. For li, 3 li, 1 li. Finally, the distance between the two sides was less than 200 meters. When they could see each other's figures under the moonlight, the battle was completely ignited at this moment. Xiu, xiu, xiu. Xiu, xiu, xiu. Countless arrows were shot out from Ma Xiangshan's light cavalry unit. Under the dense rain of arrows, the Yirqiang cavalry fell to the ground one after another. The closest cavalry unit of 3,000 men was heavily injured. Regarding this, the other cavalry units acted as if they did not see this. They could not wait for someone else to attract the firepower of the 5-star army cavalry. This way, they would be able to charge forward more smoothly. Then, it would be time for them to charge forward and beat the master to death with their fists. Xiu, xiu, xiu. Xiu, xiu, xiu. The arrows were still flying. The difference was that not only were the Yirqiang cavalry in front attacked by the arrows, but the cavalry that wanted to circle around from the sides were also attacked by the arrows. For a moment, the Yirqiang cavalry were killed or injured by the arrows. What's going on? There are only 5,000 of them. How can they have such a powerful archery ability? The Yirqiang soldiers who were leading the charge at the front all had puzzled expressions on their faces. When they realized that their own cavalry unit was also attacked by the arrows and the casualties were not low, they were all at a loss, as if they had been struck by lightning. This doubt had only just arisen when someone quickly gave them an answer. All of a sudden, countless torches lit up and deafening battle cries rang out from all directions. The Far East Army's 1st Cavalry Division, 1st Cavalry Division's 4th Cavalry Regiment, and the new Army's Reconnaissance Regiment that had been lying in ambush finally appeared. They launched a multi-pronged attack straight at the Yirqiang tribe's cavalry that was charging at the front. The many torches seemed to light up the sky at this moment, and also shattered the fighting spirit of the Yirqiang cavalry in an instant. They did not understand why so many enemies suddenly appeared here. Where did they come from? Divine soldiers and generals? Shouldn't this be the Turpan army's encampment? Why can't I see them? Where did they go? Too many questions filled their minds, to the point that many of the Yirkiang cavalry could not make the right judgment and order in the first place. They could only watch as the 5-star army cavalry rushed out of nowhere and scattered their troops, then slaughtered them one by one. Chapter 1248. Retreat, retreat. Some of the generals finally regained their senses. When they saw the 5-star army charging towards them like a ferocious tiger, they instinctively gave the order to retreat. The moment the order was given, the Yirkiang cavalry had already lost count of how many of them were dead, and how many had fallen off their horses due to injuries. Those who surrender will be spared. Those who resist will be killed without mercy. White Shuang shouted as he brandished his dual blades. Facts had proven that this slogan could decide the outcome of a battle and could also break the morale of an army. In just a quarter of an hour, a battalion of 3,000 cavalry had been completely destroyed. Just the number of people who surrendered had reached 2,300. This was only the beginning. One side was already prepared and was waiting for the enemy to arrive, while the other side was beaten until they were dizzy and had no idea what was going on. They didn't even know where to run next. The 30,000 cavalry had become 30,000 headless flies. They had completely lost the will to fight and didn't know who to fight. In the dark night, there were shadows everywhere. The Yirkiang army, who had no target, only resisted for less than half an hour before they were defeated and began to retreat. But even if they wanted to escape, they couldn't speed up. Who asked them to keep urging their horses forward? They had exhausted the potential of their horses. If they wanted to escape now, they would have to see if their comrades were willing to cooperate with them. Retreat, retreat. A Leifu, who was at the back of the army, was quite lucky. Perhaps because he was already a general leading 30,000 troops, he didn't rush to the front when there was no need for his subordinates to snatch the credit. His position was equivalent to saving his life. It allowed him to be the first to retreat when he saw that the situation wasn't good. A Leifu, who didn't even have the heart to resist, led the 3 battalions on the left, middle, and right, a total of 9,000 cavalry, and flew backwards. At this moment, he didn't know how many people there were in the 5-star army and which division they belonged to. He only knew one thing to do, and that was to retreat and escape. The main general had fled, and the other battalions were only able to put up some resistance. For hours later, when the sky began to brighten, the battle was over. The only people left on the battlefield were the soldiers of the 5-star army, who were holding bloody sabers in their hands. This night, they had killed to their heart's content. Just a preliminary count showed that they had killed more than 3,000 cavalry and captured more than 17,000. In other words, this battle had completely destroyed Alepho's main force. He had only managed to escape with 10,000 cavalry. On the other hand, the 5-star army only had less than 1,000 casualties. Most of them were injured. The number of people who had died in battle was less than 300. It was another great victory. Bai Shuang, Dai Qua, Ding Shan, and Ma Xiangshan didn't look tired. Very good. We've completed the initial mission given by the 6th young master. Next, we'll have to take advantage of the victory to pursue the enemy. Commander Ding, thank you for your hard work. The one who spoke was Bai Shuang. At the end of his words, he looked at Ding Shan. Ding Shan's expression was very unsightly because he would have to withdraw from the battlefield. After all, after 2 battles, the number of cavalry captives alone exceeded 20,000. These people had to be sent away. Otherwise, they would become a burden and trouble for the following battles. Of course, this wasn't Bai Shuang's idea. Otherwise, Ding Shan could have refused. But this was Yang Qindong's will, the will of a king. No one in the Yang faction or the 5-star army dared to go against it. Dingshan didn't say anything. Although he would definitely obey Yang Qindong's orders, it didn't mean he was willing to do so, until White Shuang came up to him and patted him on the shoulder. "Commander Dingshan, you still have a chance. If you can quickly escort these captives to Hobak Seri, you might have a chance to participate in the Battle of Ala Mountain Pass." Dingshan, who originally thought that he had no hope, heard this, and his eyes lit up. "Yes, haha. Thank you for your reminder. I know what to do. Ha ha. Men, gather the captives and confiscate their weapons. If they resist, deal with them as enemies." With new hope in his heart, Dingshan had a lot more motivation to do his work. Bai Shuang, Dai Qua, and Ma Xiangshan didn't look at the scouts anymore. What they needed to do now was to rest for the morning and head to Turpan in the afternoon. There was still a big battle waiting for them there. "You two, we have to speed up. Aleph escaped. I'm afraid that the news here will spread soon. If that's the case, the new army will be in great danger." Bai Shuang took the opportunity while the soldiers were taking the time to rest. He took the initiative to find Dai Qua and Ma Xiangshan, the two military commanders, to discuss the next military plan. 100,000 Walla cavalry were riding through the thick snow. 50 li in front of them was their target, the new army of the 5-star army. You team up, and I team up. Everyone was heading toward the Ala Mountain Pass. Before reaching their destination, no one thought that the war would break out early. The Walla General Bo Mu also didn't think that it would happen. Speaking of which, as the only survivor of Yeshin's 4 generals, Bo Mu had extremely high military command ability. He was a general who could both attack and defend. This was why every time Yeshen went out, he was always at ease, leaving the rear in Bo Muer's hands. In Yeshen's view, he didn't lack fierce generals on the battlefield. What he really lacked was a general who could defend his base and constantly change his command on the battlefield to make the most beneficial to his army. Without a doubt, Bo Mu was such a talent. It was precisely because he was a talent that Bo Mu was not as optimistic as the generals of the other countries. He had studied Yang Qindong. This was a person who planned before acting. He didn't act, but when he did act, he wanted to see the results. This kind of commander was not to be provoked. Everything he did had a strong purpose. Perhaps there were some things that one couldn't see the use of for the time being, but that didn't mean that what he did was useless. It only proved that one's vision was not there yet. After a period of time, everyone would realize that his seemingly useless move earlier had come in handy at this moment. Hadn't it? With a sufficient understanding of Yang Qindong, Bo Mu was not as optimistic as the other generals. Since Yang Qindong was extremely talented in commanding an army, why would he make such a suicidal move? If this time Yang Qindong knew that the 1st Cavalry Division was in danger, it wouldn't be surprising if he sent a large army or even personally led the expedition. Only this method of sending out reinforcements made Bo Mu unable to figure out what he wanted to do. Bo Mu had also thought if he were Yang Qindong, what would he do next? Would he counterattack on the way to the Ala Mountain Pass? It seemed very difficult to do this. After all, it looked like the 5-star army was sandwiching the 5-nation coalition army. But how could it not be that the 5-nation coalition army was sandwiching the 5-star army? On any battlefield, one side had 3 times the strength of the other side. This made Bo Mu see no hope or possibility of victory. Bo Mu had also wondered if the 5-star army would suddenly launch a 2-army sandwiching attack. But as soon as this thought appeared, it immediately disappeared. If they really did this, the 5-nation coalition army was not to be trifled with. Wouldn't they find out and send out troops? If that was the case, the 5-star army would not be able to gain any advantage in the end. It could be said that among these generals, Bo Mu was the only one who used his brain. It was only because he never thought that an army would suddenly enter the battlefield that he overlooked something. This was why he did not see Yang Qindong's tactics and strategic intentions. Bo Mu closed the opened map in his hand again and handed it to the person beside him. He let out a long sigh and then looked forward, seemingly deep in thought. Along the way, he had seen Bo Mu reveal this kind of thoughtful expression more than once. Of course, he knew what he was worried about. As a Walla warrior, his personality was straightforward, and his words were also straightforward. General, you don't have to worry. In this battle, we have 100,000 elite Walla cavalry. The other side only has 30,000 cavalry. Even if they want to play any tricks in the face of absolute strength, they are still not our opponents. General, are you thinking too much? Am I really thinking too much? Bo Mu, of course knew that what Bo Mu said was the truth. He had 100,000 elite Walla cavalry. Even if he faced the main force of the 5-star army, he still had the strength to fight and had a great chance of winning. And now, the opponent was only 30,000 cavalry. What was there to be afraid of? 100,000 cavalry seemed to give him endless strength. He laughed and said, "That's right, maybe this general is thinking too much. Come, bring wine. We will drink wine and watch how the 5-star army is destroyed by us this time." Bo Mu regained his spirit. Naturally, Bo Mu was very happy. He immediately ordered a guard to bring wine. He wanted to drink and celebrate the upcoming victory with the general in advance. 2 wine bags were quickly sent to the 2 of them. After a light tap, the 2 of them took a big gulp. Bo Mu reached out and wiped the wine from the corner of his mouth. He let out a long sigh. We really don't need to be afraid of anything, but what we should do must be done well. Bo Mu, in a while, you will inform the troops to follow closely. If there is any situation, do not act without authorization. Focus on defense and wait for the final order to attack. Chapter 1249. Yes, General. Pai Qin had followed Bo Mu for many years and had seen him save the army out of caution more than once. Therefore, he did not raise any objections this time. He also believed that the army of 100,000 needed to be disciplined. Only in this way could they remain calm in the face of change and not panic. It was said that soldiers followed the heart of the general. With such a cautious general leading the army, it had to be said that the 5-star army's counterattack would be a great obstacle. 50 li in front of the army, led by Bo Mu, Su, he was also leading the new army cavalry towards the Ala Mountain Pass. Their speed was also not fast, only slightly faster than ordinary infantry. The new army had been conserving their strength under the leadership of Su He. Many of the officers had already raised their suspicions about why they were moving so slowly. The order they had received was to go to the Ala Mountain Pass to rescue the 1st Cavalry Division that was heavily surrounded. That was the 1st Cavalry Division, which had always been regarded as the most powerful cavalry. Now that they needed their help, one could imagine how excited everyone was. Suhi was even more so. As someone who had once competed with Tian, who for the position of commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, he had always regarded it as his responsibility to surpass the other party. Now that the opportunity had finally come, he was so excited that he did not even sleep well. However, with the appearance of the telegrams, Suhi's excited heart quickly cooled down. After learning about Yang Qindong's military plan, Suhi knew that the idea of rescuing the 1st Cavalry Division would not be possible. This made him feel a little disappointed, but when he looked back at the 100,000 Walla cavalry chasing behind him, he felt a little excited. If he could inflict serious damage to this army, it would be a great achievement. Now that he knew the entire plan, he faced the doubts of his subordinates. He used the excuse that the 30,000 Yirkiang cavalry were in front of them, and that if they moved too fast, it was very likely that they would run into them. At that time, they would face the risk of being attacked from both sides. Not long after, the 4 division commanders appeared in front of Suhi, and he relayed the next step of the battle plan to them. When the 4 division commanders heard that their plan to save the 1st Cavalry Division was fake, and that their real goal was to get rid of the 100,000 Walla cavalry behind them, they were both excited and nervous. Although the new army prided themselves on their strength and dared to go head-to-head with the 1st Cavalry Division, they had to admit that the huge difference in numbers was an important factor that hindered them from completing their plan. But when they knew that they had to deal with 100,000 Walla cavalry this time, they had to admit that the huge difference in numbers was an important factor that hindered them from completing their plan. They had to admit that with such a huge gap, it would be very difficult for them to complete the mission. Only our new army, Kulu, the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, asked the question that everyone wanted to ask. Suhi looked at Kulu with a gaze of praise. This person had matured very quickly, and his ability to see the big picture was also very effective. He was a good seedling, and he was able to ask the main point of the matter with a single sentence. In order to give everyone confidence, Suhi said, "Of course, it's not only us. I can tell you that just last night and this morning, the 1st Cavalry Division's 4th Regiment, the Far Eastern Army's 1st Cavalry Division, and the New Army's Light Cavalry Regiment have already defeated 30,000 Turks and 30,000 Yirkiang cavalry. They are now rushing towards us, and as long as we meet up, it will be time for us to launch an all-out counterattack. At that time, the foreign race's 1st Army will appear from the rear of the Walla Army. When the disparity in numbers isn't too great, we will definitely be able to deal a heavy blow to the Walla Army and break the Allied Army's operation against our 5-star army." This was their trump card, and also the source of their confidence. If everything was as Suhi said, then they would have a total of 80,000 people. With a difference of 10,000 soldiers, they would be able to make up for this gap. Then there's no problem. When Kulu heard this, he nodded happily. He was most worried that they wouldn't have enough soldiers. If the disparity was too great, then this battle wouldn't be easy to fight. After all, the Walla cavalry wasn't to be trifled with. Before the 5-star army appeared, they were the strongest existence. Even the Tatar cavalry wasn't their opponent. The other 3 division commanders also nodded in agreement. Then, their bodies emitted a rumbling battle intent. It could be seen that they were also very eager to fight and continue to make contributions. Okay, everyone knows the situation. Now, you can all return to your divisions and give your orders to the officers below. Remember, don't let the cat out of the bag before we meet up with the army. There are a lot of tile scouts around us. Suhi was giving advice to the 4 division commanders, reminding them that they must keep the secret well. Unlike the other countries, the Walla cavalry's riding skills weren't inferior to the 5-star army's cavalry. In addition, Bomir was very careful. Not long after the army set off from Tufan City, there were already Walla scouts keeping an eye on them. Although Suhi had sent people to surround and kill them, there were always batches after batches of them died. Because the combat strength of both sides was similar, in the end, no one would end up well. In the end, Suhi could only let them watch him from the side. Anyway, before they met up with the army, he wouldn't do anything out of the ordinary. Being watched like this could lower Bomir's vigilance. After the 4 division commanders agreed, they all retreated and waited to meet up with Bai Shuang and the rest. 2 days later, the first to arrive wasn't the 5-star army's cavalry. Instead, it was a Leifu's 10,000 cavalry that escaped from the west. Previously, He received a telegram from Commander Bai Shuang saying that Aleifu and the 10,000 Yirkian cavalry were likely to appear on the path of the new army. For this, He also made some arrangements. For example, she sent the 2nd Cavalry Division to the front and the 3rd Cavalry Division and the 4th Cavalry Division to the left and right. She also told them that once they encountered the defeated cavalry of Yi Erqiang, they did not need to talk. They could just kill them directly, but at the same time, he didn't want to meet them. After all, it was 10,000 cavalry. Without a suitable encirclement, it wouldn't be easy to defeat them. Naturally, He was worried that once he fought with Aleifu's 10,000 cavalrymen, Bo Muir, who was behind him, would soon receive the news. If he couldn't destroy this enemy quickly, it was likely that the new Third Army would face the risk of being attacked from both sides. This was not what he wanted to see. But things might not develop as expected. It was just like how he didn't expect to meet this enemy cavalry, but they still met in the end. When He received the news from the scouts that there was a cavalry with Yi Erqiang's flag on the road ahead, she let out a sigh of relief and order the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th divisions to attack. We must defeat this enemy in the shortest time possible. At the same time, inform the 1st Cavalry Division to block the charge of the Walla cavalry and buy us enough time to deal with the enemy. Next, it would be a competition to see who was faster. This would most likely determine the direction of the war. After Aleifu's defeat, he led 10,000 cavalry to the east. The reason why he didn't escape and continued to walk on the official road was so that he could join forces with the Walla cavalry to eliminate the new army of the 5-Star Army. First, there was Turpan's inaction, which led to the loss of the city. Then there was the sneak attack here, leaving only 10,000 men left. After 2 defeats, Aleifu knew that if he couldn't make a beautiful comeback, even if he escaped back to Yirkiang, he would face the risk of losing his position and being imprisoned. In order to be able to take the blame for his crimes, Aleifu had no choice but to walk on the official road and fight with his back to the river. After 2 defeats, Aleifu learned his lesson this time. He first sent out a large number of scouts to scout ahead. At the same time, he also sent a group of elite scouts to take a detour. Their mission was to meet General Bo Muir of the Wara and tell him what happened to them. Then, they would form a pincer attack on the new army. After sending out the scouts, Aleifu ordered the army to be ready for a defensive battle at any time. He only had 10,000 cavalry, so he wouldn't charge at the Xian San army that had 30,000 cavalry. He only needed to stand guard here and wait for the Walla cavalry to rush up. Then he could launch a pincer attack. It was because he was already prepared that when he learned that the new army was 10 miles in front of him, Aleifu decisively ordered the army to stop and defend. After doing this, he began to pray that the Walla cavalry must be faster. Perhaps the prayers had worked, but in fact, it was the small team of scouts that had been sent out. They had met the scouts of the Walla army before the battle had even started. After revealing their identities, the scouts led them to the general of the Walla army, Bo Muir. What? The 5-Star Army took the lead to launch a counterattack. Your General Aleifu was defeated and lost 20,000 of his 30,000 cavalry? Bo Muir, who was riding on his horse, saw the Yirkiang cavalry under a withered tree. From them, he learned some things that happened 2 days ago. It's not that he didn't consider this possibility, but after thinking about it, he didn't think that the 5-Star Army would try to break a stone with an egg. After all, the disparity in strength was obvious. It's just that he forgot a very important point. That was, not every army of the 5-Star Army had the strength of the Walla cavalry. This was his biggest oversight. Fortunately, although Aleifu's army was defeated, he wasn't scared out of his wits. He still wanted to take the blame. As a result, it gave him an opportunity to attack the new army from both sides. There were more than 30,000 cavalry of the five-star army in front of him. If he could completely eliminate them, it would be a heavy blow to the five-star army and Bognam of Gojoseon. When he thought of this result, Bo Mir's face was full of excitement. "Where is Biki-in?" Chapter 1250. "I'm here." Peaky-Eye seemed to have thought of something and replied excitedly, "This general will give you 30,000 elite cavalrymen. I want you to take them and launch a fierce attack on the first army. The main army will arrive soon. Do you have the confidence to open a gap and join up with General Alefu?" After thinking it over, Bo Mir still decided to send 30,000 troops. In his opinion, if he sent too few, it would be difficult to break through the enemy's defense line. If he sent too many, he might be in danger if something unexpected happened. Thus, 30,000 was suitable. Finally, he could lead his troops to fight the five-star army. Peaky-Eye was naturally excited and replied happily, "Please rest assured, General, I will not disappoint you." "Very good. Go ahead." After giving Peaky-Eye a look of praise, Bo Mir immediately gave the order. Other than the 5,000 cavalrymen who were at the back, the rest of the cavalrymen were ready to attack at any time to support Peaky-Eye and take down the new army. Yi Erqiang's 10,000 cavalrymen were already in formation under General Alefu's lead. Strong bows were held in their hands, and they were 5 miles away. Alefu, who was in heavy armor, looked forward with a slightly anxious gaze. He didn't know if the scouts he sent to inform the Walla army had completed their mission. If not, he didn't have much confidence in holding on for long with his 10,000 cavalrymen. Unknowingly, the sky had turned gloomy once again. Snowflakes drifted down. Alefu reached out his right hand to catch a snowflake as a look of surprise flashed across his eyes. "It's snowing heavily." Then the snow filled the sky and filled the space in a very short time. For a moment, even the line of sight was blocked. This made Alefu's heart sink involuntarily. Obstructed vision was not a good thing for long-range archers. Unable to accurately lock onto the target, Alefu cursed the heavens for not opening their eyes. How could it snow so heavily at this time? But at the same time, he couldn't help but raise his spirits and give orders to the cavalrymen. "Everyone, don't shoot blindly. You must aim before shooting. Even if you can only shoot one arrow, you must hit the target." Usually when facing a cavalry charge from afar, considering the distance, most archers would only shoot 2 arrows, unless they had extremely fast hand speed and could shoot 3 or 4 arrows. However, due to the heavy snow, it was much more difficult to pinpoint the target's position. Alefu had no choice but to shoot an arrow to pinpoint the target's location. The wait was long, yet it also seemed to be over in the blink of an eye. Not long after the Yirkiang cavalry got into formation, rumbling sounds came from the distance. Then more and more black figures appeared in their line of sight. Alefu's gaze couldn't help but tighten as his left hand tightly gripped the scabbard of his saber. At that moment, Alefu was not the only one who was extremely nervous. The 10,000 cavalrymen beside him were also very nervous. Although they couldn't estimate how many enemies were charging towards them due to the heavy snow, their intuition told them that there were quite a number of enemy riders, at least far more than they had. Prepare to fire. Some of the Kiliarchs and generals standing in the middle of the army shouted, causing the already tense atmosphere to become even more tense. Kill! The cavalry of the new army approached from afar. The commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division, Bai Kai, held a sharp saber in his hand as he constantly shouted. Under his lead, the 8,400 men of the 2nd Cavalry Division charged from the front. Almost at the same time, the commander of the 3rd Cavalry Division, Lei Chuandang, also gave the order to charge. On the right, the commander of the 4th Cavalry Division, Changbo, didn't want to fall behind, and led the entire division forward. More than 20,000 cavalrymen, more than twice the number of the Yirkiang cavalry. Their momentum soared, and their morale was high. Don't be afraid. Sensing this monstrous battle intent, Alephu used his own shout to stabilize the army. Vala's 100,000 cavalrymen are converging with us. As long as we can stop their charge, it will be time for us to launch a pincer attack from both sides. Brothers, great merit is in front of us. Fire! The more Alephu shouted, the more excited he became. Through this shout, he seemed to be able to motivate himself. Following the last shout, tens of thousands of arrows flew across the sky, flying toward the charging cavalrymen of the three armies. Ding, ding, dang, dang. Ding, dang, ding, ding. Arrows filled the sky, falling on top of the 2nd Cavalry Division along with the snowflakes. What followed was a wave of saber swinging and all sorts of clashing sounds. Under the almost indiscriminate attack, there would always be 5-star army cavalrymen falling from their horses. Under such a wide range of arrows, blocking and dodging became very limited. Fortunately, the new army, under the leadership of Su He, paid a lot of attention to archery training. When they saw the sky covering arrows flying towards them, most of the cavalrymen leaped to the sides of their horses, minimizing the losses. The distance of 100 meters was covered in less than 10 breaths for the cavalrymen. Using this opportunity, the Yirkiang cavalrymen had already cleared the front line and gathered together like an iron bucket. Facing the enemy's superior numbers, Alephu didn't choose to meet force with force. Instead, he used the cavalrymen as a tortoise shell, forming a human wall to defend. 10,000 cavalrymen, endless and boundless. This wasn't just for show. If one didn't see it with their own eyes, it was hard to imagine how magnificent and terrifying 10,000 cavalrymen would be. If such an army was to be killed one by one, who knew how long it would take? The best method was to directly destroy their fighting spirit and make them flee in all directions. This was the best way to resolve the battle. Usually, when the 5-star army was facing an enemy, the most habitual way of fighting was to split the enemy up and then find the place where the main general was. After that, they would launch the fiercest attack, either killing the enemy general or scaring the enemy general away. Whichever one of them was chosen, they would win. But now, Alephu was holed up in the human wall, making it impossible for the 3 cavalry divisions to find him in a short period of time. This also achieved the effect of capturing the leader first. Alephu's strategy was very brilliant. He first protected his own safety, so that the army wouldn't fall into chaos. Then, he used the Walla cavalry as an excuse to build up the confidence of everyone. With a cohesive heart and hope, such an army would not be easily defeated. At the very least, it wouldn't be resolved in a short time. In the blink of an eye, an hour had passed, and the 3 cavalry divisions had only managed to wipe out 2,000 or so cavalrymen on the outer perimeter. This rate of attrition made the 3 cavalry division commanders extremely anxious, but there was nothing they could do. Continue to charge. Stop using arrows and arrows. Use bows and arrows to attack, and close the distance. Try to open an opening as soon as possible. 2nd Cavalry Division Commander Bai Kai thought that at this time, 1st Cavalry Division Commander Kulu was about to face the Walla Cavalry's charge. He immediately felt a huge pressure on his body. In fact, Commander Kulu had already seen the 30,000 cavalrymen led by Tai Chien. Moreover, both sides were already fighting. This time, after receiving the order, the 30,000 cavalrymen did not stop for a single moment, using their fastest speed to appear in front of the 1st Cavalry Division's front lines. Their only thought was to render a great contribution. This time, after receiving the order, the 30,000 cavalrymen did not stop for a single moment, using their fastest speed to appear in front of the 1st Cavalry Division's front lines. Then, relying on their advantage in numbers, they launched an earth-shattering charge. Arrows were shot from afar. After 2 rounds of arrows, at least 1,000 cavalrymen were killed or injured. Kulu pulled out his cavalry sword and no longer defended. Instead, he changed to a frontal assault, not defending and counterattacking. This was the method Kulu prepared for the enemy. He wanted to catch the enemy off guard. He wanted to catch them off guard. Of the 8,400 cavalry warriors, apart from the 3,400 who continued to harass the enemy with arrows, the other 5,000 cavalrymen followed him and counterattacked with arrows. When they charged into the enemy's camp, Tai Chin, who was waiting to see the 5-star army's performance, couldn't help but widen his eyes at this moment. On the way here, Tikian had thought about whether his sudden appearance would catch the other side off guard, or whether the other side had already prepared for it. For example, if the other side had already prepared something like a barricade or an iron caltrop, and how to deal with the next situation using the smallest price to obtain the greatest victory, and so on. However, when he arrived, he didn't see the 1st Cavalry Division preparing anything. He didn't even see the most basic of obstacles. This made him happy. He thought that he was fast enough and took advantage of the time difference. This way, he was even more confident. With 30,000 men against less than 10,000 cavalrymen, wouldn't it be easy? It could be said that Tai Chin had made several preparations. He was just waiting for the enemy to make a move. But what he didn't expect was that the enemy would actually counterattack. This greatly exceeded his expectations. Many of the cavalrymen charging at the front didn't expect this either. When Kulu led his 5,000 cavalrymen to charge, there were still many Walla cavalrymen who were crouching on the sides of their horses or under their horses, making tactical movements to avoid the arrows. Unexpectedly, the enemy cavalry appeared beside them, caught off guard. Many soldiers didn't even have the chance to raise their swords before they were killed by the approaching cavalry of the 5-star army. In a short period of time, at least 600 cavalrymen were killed in a single clash, and the number of injured reached a shocking number of more than 1,000. Just one wave of arrows, coupled with an unexpected wave of arrows, had instantly killed more than 3,000 of the enemy. Kulu had only lost less than 200 of his cavalry, and most of them were still injured. With this great victory, he led his 5,000 cavalrymen back safely. Chapter 1251. Bastard! Bastard! Someone in the middle of the army roared loudly. He was so confident when he came, but he lost 1/10 of his combat power in one move. He couldn't accept it. He shouted at the soldiers who were beating the drums, "Signal for the attack! Go, go, go!" He was so angry that he wanted to use his advantage in numbers to destroy the enemy. Even if the enemy's arrows were sharp and he had to lose some combat power, he didn't care anymore. In short, he wanted the cavalry of the 5-star army to die. He wanted to let these people know how pitiful the consequences of angering him were. The drumbeats suddenly became hurried and became more and more frequent. Hearing the order, the Tile cavalry immediately sped up and sped up again and again, charging towards the less than 10,000 5-star army cavalry formation. On the battlefield, the drumbeat was an order. The more urgent the drumbeat, the faster and fiercer the attack. For a moment, the white snow on the ground was kicked up by the war horses. When combined with the heavy snow falling from the sky, it gave the impression that the sky was covered in white snow, greatly obstructing one's vision. This is what a fierce attack looks like. Haha, retreat. Commander Kulu, who had just returned to the front with a victory, looked at the Walla cavalry from afar. He was not afraid at all. Instead, he showed an excited smile. As he waved his hand, the signal flag beside him flashed. The cavalry of the 1st Cavalry Division quickly retreated 2 miles. Because of the heavy snow, the Walla cavalry couldn't see their movement clearly. They could only roughly see the 5-star Army cavalry retreating. This gave them endless confidence. They thought that this was the moment to crush the enemy's heart. Victory was within their reach. However, the charging Walla cavalry did not know that what awaited them ahead was an even more painful forgetting, as well as an unimaginable trap of death. Charge! Charge! The 5-star Army cavalry is afraid and retreating. Charge and kill them. Faster! We can't let the 5-star Army cavalry escape. Under the shouts of the Kiliarchs, the entire Walla cavalry's morale kept increasing. They kept increasing their speed. It felt like they wouldn't be able to get any credit if they were a step slower. Charge! How? Charge! Save! Charge! No. In the heavy snow, the Walla cavalry got closer and closer to the 1st Cavalry Division. When they were 1 mile away, something strange happened. Rows of sharpened wooden stakes suddenly appeared in front of them. If their vision allowed, they could make all kinds of evasive maneuvers and even stop their horses from 300 meters away to avoid any losses. But now, they were charging too fast, and their line of sight was limited. The faster the cavalry charged, the more violent the impact they had on the barricades. In a short period of time, at least 1,000 cavalrymen were killed, and the number who couldn't get up was uncountable. The appearance of the 3 barricades became a nightmare for the charging Walla cavalry. When they saw their war horses fall one after another and blood spurted out, some of the cavalry at the back finally forced themselves to stop their war horses. However, even though they stopped, the cavalrymen behind them couldn't stop. They didn't know what was going on in front of them. They were still charging forward according to the rhythm of the war drums. It was a tragedy. The cavalrymen at the front couldn't stop, and the cavalrymen at the back couldn't charge forward. In a short period of time, both sides crashed into each other. The number of cavalrymen who died from the collisions increased exponentially. In a short period of time, thousands of corpses were lying on the ground. The smell of blood filled the air. Quick, hide to the sides. A Kiliarch finally reacted and shouted out an order. As expected of the elite Walla cavalry, after a short period of chaos, order was quickly restored. The cavalrymen at the front dodged to the sides, and the cavalrymen at the back started to charge at the stakes. Bang! Clang! 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 All kinds of noises were heard. The cavalrymen who charged at the stakes were in all kinds of shapes and sizes. However, no matter what they did, they couldn't escape the fate of death. After all, there was a limit to the number of barricades. After several waves of attacks, the Walla cavalry used their lives to knock down all of the barricades. They were no longer of any use. The stakes were like a natural counter to the cavalrymen. It made people hate them, but they couldn't do anything about it. Today, the Walla cavalry had shown their fearless side, and they had completely destroyed the horse barricade that usually made them pale in fright. However, no one cheered because this was not the result they wanted. It was the result of countless lives sacrificed to make up for it. There are no more stakes in the way. Kill! When they saw another group of cavalry charge forward, but there were no shouts, the tile cavalry on both sides cried out in excitement and once again launched a fierce attack, looking as if they were going to take revenge. No. After charging onto the official road, the cavalry that had been silent for less than a quarter of an hour suddenly let out mournful cries. The cries became louder and louder, causing the Walla cavalry to stop in their tracks. They really couldn't figure out what was going on. This time, it wasn't the stakes that could be seen with the naked eye that blocked the road, but the caltrops that were placed under the snow. Under the cover of the heavy snow, The caltrops were hidden in the ground. Once a cavalry charged over and stomped on the caltrops, one could imagine the excruciating pain it would cause. The war horses immediately neighed, and the cavalrymen riding on them were thrown to the ground one by the frenzied war horses. Whether it was the stakes or the caltrops, Kalu was already prepared. When he received the mission by Kai, and the other two division commanders gave him all the caltrops in their hands. However, Kalu didn't use them immediately. It wasn't that he didn't want to use them, but the timing wasn't right. The Walla cavalry was good at fighting, and they weren't ordinary cavalrymen. They had rich battle experience, and it was impossible for them not to be prepared against conventional weapons like the stakes and caltrops. Therefore, if he wanted to use them, he had to catch them off guard. Fortunately, the heavy snow gave Kulu inspiration. That was why the series of events just now happened. Most importantly, under the heavy snow, both sides of the official road were completely sealed, forming a pile of snow that was half a person's height. The horses couldn't gallop on it, so Kulu didn't have to worry about being attacked from both sides. He could just focus on the main road. The stakes and caltrops were used separately, and it was indeed effective. However, this wasn't the end. While the enemy's charge was interrupted by the two division commanders, and the enemy's morale was unstable, Kulu led another 5,000 cavalrymen to attack. The caltrops along the way were covered by the corpses of the Walla cavalry and their horses. They only needed to step on them to charge out. Boom! The Walla cavalry who were waiting for the movement in front of them saw a torrent of people rushing out, following which arrows and sabers flew out to meet them. However, they did not expect that it would be the cavalry of the 5-Star Corps that rushed out at this time. Once again, they miscalculated. In the next exchange, who knew how many of the Walla cavalry were chopped to death? As for the remaining people, they had long been beaten silly by Kulu's successive moves. They were scared and immediately turned to retreat. Their speed was even faster than rabbits. After 2 charges and 2 blocks, the 5-Star Army won a great victory. At least 6,000 cavalrymen were killed, and the enemy's morale was greatly damaged. Kulu heaved a sigh of relief. With this defeat in front of them, as long as the enemy's division commander wasn't stupid, he wouldn't launch an attack for a while. With the joy of victory, Kulu rode his horse to the temporary military headquarters 2 miles away and met with Division Commander Suhi. He already knew about the development of the battle from the scouts. When Kulu entered the tent, Suhi stood up to welcome him. "Not bad, Kulu. Your performance is not bad. I will report your contributions to the 6th Young Master. I think that as the new regiment commander, you won't be able to run away from the position of division commander." Suhi took the initiative to stand up to welcome Kulu, which meant that he thought highly of Kulu. When he heard the other party recommend him to be the commander of the new regiment, Kulu was extremely excited. He immediately cupped his fist and said, "This general thanks the military commander for his training, but I only want to serve under the military commander." Oh, Kulu's answer greatly surprised Suhi. One must know that he was only the new army division commander. Although the new army was going to be expanded into a new regiment, there would be 3 more division commander positions. In the future, when the new army became a new regiment, there would also be 3 empty division commander positions. However, that was still far away. For a talented commander like Kulu, he couldn't wait any longer. Otherwise, it would be a serious mistake in the use of people. With an idea in his mind, Suhi patted Kulu's shoulder and said with satisfaction, "I understand your feelings, but with your talent, it's too much for you to only lead a division. If there is a chance, it would be good to lead more troops. Besides, we are all in the 5-Star Army, and we are all working for the 6th Young Master. There shouldn't be any distinction between us. After some persuasion, Kulu clearly listened to it. However, he still had a troubled expression as he said, "But I still want to be in your military seat. All right, let's not talk about this matter for now. This army commander has only reported your name and achievements to the 6th young master. As for whether or not you have the opportunity to serve, it is not up to this army commander to decide. Just wait for orders. Okay, let's discuss how to deal with the Walla army if they launch another attack." A division commander and a division commander immediately came in front of the sand table. They pointed at the terrain on the sand table and started an intense discussion based on the military strength of both sides. The attack had been thwarted, the losses were severe, and the news of the defeat of the Walla army had spread. The expressions of the division commanders became extremely ugly. Chapter 1252. Originally, he had thought that he was leading the most elite cavalry in the world and had an absolute advantage in terms of military strength. He had thought that he would be able to win this first battle, and he would also become the first general of the Five-Nation Alliance to defeat the Five-Star Army on the battlefield. But he didn't expect that the greater the hope, the greater the disappointment. He actually lost 6,000 soldiers. This result was too unsatisfactory, and he couldn't accept it. Should he continue to charge? Tai Chin really wanted to give such an order, but when he saw that the other generals in the tent had their heads lowered and seemed to have a lot on their minds, he finally suppressed the anger in his heart. He changed the topic and said, "Previously, I was too impulsive and caused the army to suffer losses. Regarding this matter, I will personally apologize to General Beaumier. As for everyone, take a good rest. At the same time, build some barricades to prevent the Five-Star Army from attacking." A cavalry of more than 20,000 people actually had to defend against the attack of less than 10,000 Five-Star Army. If this was said half a day ago, Tai Chin would have laughed out loud. But now, he couldn't help but admit that the Five-Star Army's cavalry had this kind of strength. The attack suddenly stopped. This made Su He and Kulu, who had thought of all kinds of countermeasures to resolve the enemy cavalry's attack, confused. Seeing that the sky was about to turn dark, the two of them looked at each other and finally believed that the previous defeat must have scared the enemy's general. "Sigh, what a pity! There are still so many iron caltrops that I haven't used in the horse-stirring rope that I buried in the snow." Even though Kulu knew that the other party wouldn't attack for a while, he still had a sad expression on his face. These words made Suhi's eyebrows twitch. Wasn't it good that the enemy didn't attack? As for not having to risk their lives, once the main force arrived, they would have the strength to fight back even if they had to face the enemy head-on. The new army's 3 cavalry divisions were still attacking, in the face of a sea of people, or even when the enemy cavalry was squeezed together. The arrow formation was not of much use. Under the improvisation of the 2nd Cavalry Division's commander, Beatsai, they switched to using bows and arrows and horse-strapping tactics. Arrows after arrows were shot at close range, and ropes were like sharp awls, trapping the Yirkiang cavalry and dragging them under their horses. The Five-Star Army was like a spider weaving a web, slowly nibbling away at the surrounded Yirkiang cavalry. Aleifu, who was protected by 10,000 cavalrymen, had an extremely ugly expression on his face. He had been standing guard here for half a day. The sky was about to turn dark, but there was still no sign of reinforcements. What was going on? Even if the scouts he sent out didn't inform the Walla army in time, the Walla army should be aware of such a huge commotion, right? Sensing that the battle cries were getting closer and closer, this proved that the encirclement was getting smaller and smaller. The fear on Aleifu's face deepened. He had a feeling that this time it was very likely that he would die here. The group of lieutenants and soldiers around him had the same thought. Originally, They thought that after persevering for a few hours, reinforcements would arrive. Then, they would work together from the inside and the outside, and they would be able to defeat the five-star army and return to receive the king's reward. But now, it seemed that their lives were in danger. The battle cries continued, and one of the lieutenants finally couldn't help but ask, "General, when will our reinforcements arrive?" "Soon, should be soon." A Leifu, who didn't want the morale of the army to be in chaos, could only reply. Not long after he finished speaking, the sound of horse hooves suddenly came from the outer formation, followed by a hubbub of voices. "Reinforcements are coming. A lot of cavalrymen are coming." One of the soldiers was lying on the snow. When he raised his head, he had a joyful expression on his face. "Oh, then it must be the reinforcements." "Ha ha, the reinforcements are here. Tell the brothers we must hold on. Victory is right in front of us." Alepha changed from his previous silent appearance. At this moment, he became lively again. That's right, reinforcements were coming, but it wasn't the Walla cavalry. After Baiqin's repeated failures, he was indeed afraid of the five-star army's cavalry. He chose to stay put and wait for Bomir to lead the main force. This action was equivalent to giving up on the 10,000 Yi Erchang cavalry. If it wasn't the Walla cavalry, then it was the five-star army that had chased Alephu all the way and defeated them. They were Bai Shuang's 4th Cavalry Regiment, Dai Qua's 1st Cavalry Division, and Ma Xiangshan's Cavalry Regiment. After a series of battles, Bai Shuang and the others rested for half a day. It was this half a day that allowed Alephu to run so far. Fortunately, the new army received the telegram and made a timely response, blocking the 10,000 cavalrymen here. After the two sides met, the commander of the new army's 2nd Cavalry Division, Bai Kai, said excitedly, "It's great that you guys are here. How about this? Let's work together and try to take down the Yi Erchang cavalry as soon as possible." As he spoke, Bai Kai prepared to give the order to attack again. But he was stopped by Bai Shuang. "Commander Bai, don't be impatient." Although Bai Shuang was a regiment commander, he was the regiment commander of the 1st Cavalry Division and Yang Qindong's student. Furthermore, he had performed many meritorious deeds. This kind of status was more than enough to be a division commander in any other unit. Since he suddenly spoke, even Bai Kai couldn't criticize him. When everyone's eyes fell on Bai Shuang, the young commander touched the tip of his nose embarrassedly and said, "Everyone, don't look at me like that. I just want to see if I can convince the Yi Erchang cavalry. Isn't it better to subdue them without fighting? Convince them? How can this?" Bai Kai wanted to say that it was impossible, but when he considered that the situation had completely reversed and that the enemy was only hoping for the reinforcements of the Walla cavalry, there was no movement from the Walla cavalry at this time. This path should not be possible. Perhaps persuading the enemy to surrender now would have an unexpected effect. It didn't take much effort. It was just letting Bai Shuang test it out. Even if it didn't succeed, they wouldn't lose anything. The other commanders laughed and agreed to Bai Shuang's request. "Thank you, everyone. I'll give it a try." Bai Shuang smiled gratefully at everyone. Then he rode his horse to the surrounded Yi Erchang's camp. He didn't know when it happened, but there was already an object similar to a loudspeaker made of iron in his hand. When he was studying with Yang Qindong in the Yang Family Academy, he made many simple and effective things like this. Now, there were many similar small things in his 4th Regiment. With the metal loudspeaker in his hand, Bai Shuang's voice echoed in the snowy night. "Brothers of Yi Erchang and General Alephu, how are you?" "I am Bai Shuang, the commander of the 4th Regiment of the 1st Cavalry Division of the 5-Star Army." "Oh, you may not know me, but I know you because 3 nights ago I set you up to attack the camp and defeated you." He said all this with the attitude of a victor. This kind of blatant flaunting was especially jarring to the ears of the Yi Erqiang cavalry, but they could only endure it. Now that they were surrounded by the army, whoever rushed out first would be courting death. Bai Shuang didn't seem to have such awareness. He continued to talk to himself. To be honest, the five-star army is very powerful, but it's just a name. It's nothing in the eyes of the powerful five-star army. I'm afraid you still don't know that 3 nights ago, the Turpan cavalry was wiped out by us in one fell swoop. In comparison, you're not bad. At least 10,000 of you managed to escape. Oh, right, I forgot to tell you. 5 days ago, our 1st Cavalry Division charged out of the Ala Mountain Pass and heavily injured the 80,000 Ely cavalry that surrounded us. We killed and captured about 60,000 of them. Also, just this afternoon, our 5-star army's 200,000 reinforcements suddenly appeared behind the 100,000 Walla army. After a fierce battle, we killed a lot of them. Now, the Walla army has fled. In other words, on this battlefield, only your cavalry of less than 10,000 is still persevering. I want to ask you, what is the meaning of your persistence? Truth and falsehood came out of Bai Shuang's mouth. This was the so-called all is fair in war. There wasn't much truth in his words, but to the Yerkiang cavalry who were ill-informed, it was enough to create a lot of pressure. The moment these words were said, many people's expressions changed. Many people started to doubt, or even believe Bai Shuang's words. At this moment, Bai Shuang was still doing his political work. Yerkiang cavalry, our 5-star army won't kill captives. As long as they are sincere and changing, we will give them a chance. Just like 3 days ago, when you lost, there were 17,000 captives in our hands. Now, not only are they safe, after a thorough investigation, they are free to choose their future. For example, they can join the 5-star army and become a part of us, or they can become a normal citizen and be given 30 mu of grain, a wife and children, and a warm bed. They can live a life far away from the flames of war. That's such a comfortable and desirable life. The bewitching words continued. Under Bai Shuang's glib tongue, he described the future, so well that many of the Yerkiang cavalry started to yearn for it. Even some of the generals started to waver. A Leifu, who was in the middle of the army, naturally felt the change. He wanted to shout out loud and tell everyone not to believe the words of the 5-star army's general. But before he could say anything, Bai Shuang called out his name. General Leifu, I know you. Actually, we don't have any grudges. What's even better is that your appearance didn't cause any losses to the 5-star army. So, we welcome your surrender. If you choose to abandon the darkness and join the light, I can promise you in front of the 3 armies that we won't touch a single hair on your head. We will even ensure your safety and let you do whatever you want to do happily. I don't think anyone isn't afraid of death, let alone this kind of meaningless death. Don't you think so? Chapter 12:53. All right, I've said everything that needs to be said. I'll give you the time it takes for an incense stick to burn to consider. During this time, I can guarantee the safety of those who surrender. On the other hand, if anyone still wishes to resist, the final attack will be launched after an incense stick. At that time, regardless of whether you are a general or a soldier, you will be killed without mercy. At the end of his speech, Bai Shuang's tone became incomparably resolute, revealing his cold-blooded side as a general. An incense stick would determine life and death. At this moment, the attack had already stopped. However, one could foresee that if these people did not surrender, a new round of attacks would be even more ferocious after an incense stick's worth of time. At that time, not many people would be able to survive. Apart from the night's cold wind, the camp of tens of thousands of soldiers was eerily silent. Even the war horses had stopped neighing, causing the atmosphere to become extremely strange. The silence lasted for an unknown period of time until someone among the Yi Erqiang cavalry spoke up. "I don't want to die. I still have my parents, wife, and children at home. I want to live. I want to surrender." This voice was like a stone thrown into a tranquil pool of water, instantly attracting even more resonance. For a moment, countless people echoed the voice. "That's right, we don't want to die either. We choose to surrender." As this voice became more and more intense, the cavalry began to walk out of the crowd. They threw down their weapons, dismounted, and squatted in front of the 5-star army cavalry with their hands on their heads. "Very good. Move these people over there and get them some food." Division Commander Bai Kai's face blossomed into a smile. Originally, they had to pay a price to obtain victory. Now, with just a few words, they had forced a large number of people to choose to surrender. This method of winning without expending any effort was truly brilliant. When he looked at Bai Shuang, his eyes were filled with admiration. With this example in front of them, more and more Yi Erqiang cavalry chose to surrender. They wanted to live, and they also had the right to choose between life and death. As more and more ordinary soldiers chose to surrender, some of the sergeants, decarches, centurions, and even 2 chiliarchs in the army also chose to surrender. The Yi Erqiang cavalry camp seemed to be collapsing by itself. Aleifu, who was in the middle of the army, had an ugly expression on his face. Although he knew that he would be defeated, he was defeated so quickly that many of the soldiers did not even ask for his opinion before surrendering. A feeling of the general trend of the battle was deeply entangled in his heart. The number of soldiers on the outer perimeter dwindled, and the number of people who chose to surrender changed from the initial few to the entire battalion. Seeing his personal guards looking at him expectantly, Aleifu sighed deeply and said, "All right, you guys can also make your own choice. This general will not force you guys to do so. But I cannot surrender. I am Yi Erqiang's general. I am." At this moment, Aleifu still wanted to express some emotions to engrave his will. However, before he could finish his words, the bodyguards around him had already started to persuade him. "General, we've already lost. Even if you don't surrender, the result won't change. General, once the news of our defeat spreads back to the country, I'm afraid it will be very disadvantageous for you. Even if you sacrifice yourself now, you won't be able to change the result. You won't receive any glory either. General, where there's life, there's hope. As long as we're still alive, there's hope. At worst, we'll follow the general's army and stay away from the war. Wouldn't it be great to be a farmer? General, the general trend has already passed. If you don't surrender now, you'll only lose your life in vain. It's meaningless." General, all the bodyguards were trying to persuade Aleifu. Everyone had different opinions, but their goal was the same. That was to persuade the general to make the same choice as them. As a bodyguard, their greatest responsibility was to protect the general's safety. If something happened to the general, it would mean that the bodyguards did not fulfill their responsibilities. It would be a disgrace. Although they had already chosen to surrender, if the general chose to die in battle, it would also mean that they did not complete their mission. This would become a lifelong regret for many people. In order to complete the final mission, and also for Aleifu's sake, the bodyguards' voices of persuasion grew louder and louder. There were also more and more opinions. Something was obviously fake, but when many people talked about it, it would often make people believe it to be true. Aleifu was indeed prepared to fight to the death. He wanted to prove that he was a qualified general, someone who was not afraid of death. However, the bodyguard's persuasion soon made him waver. Aleifu, who was not resolute to die, listened to the bodyguard's blueprint for the future. His resolute heart slowly began to waver. 60 breaths left. just when Aleifu felt that it was difficult to make a choice, outside the camp, Bai Shuang's voice sounded again. This also woke Aleifu up. When he raised his head to look around, he was horrified to find that other than the 30 bodyguards he brought with him, there was nothing else around him. In this short period of time, the remaining 7,000 cavalry had all chosen to surrender. At first, they left one by one, but later, they left in groups. Now, on the entire battlefield, only 30 people, including Aleifu, had not made their final choice. An army of several tens of thousands surrounded 30 people. The result was already decided. Not to mention that these people were only slightly stronger than ordinary cavalry. Even if each of them could fight against 100 people, they still had no chance of escaping and winning. 30 breaths. Bai Shuang's voice sounded again. It was like the wind of hell and the horn of death. When Aleifu heard it, he could not help but tremble. "General, we have no other choice. Please give the order." The bodyguards looked at Aleifu with longing eyes. At this moment, Aleifu still wanted to say a few words, but the atmosphere of the battlefield did not allow him to do so. He already had no time. "I surrender." When Bai Shuang said the last 10 breaths of time, Aleifu finally made his final decision. After saying those 3 words, his entire body collapsed. At that moment, he was like an old man that had lost all of his vitality, as if he would age at any moment. The 7,000 cavalry had all chosen to surrender. At this moment, Bai Shuang also let out a sigh of relief. Then, under everyone's gaze, he took the initiative to ride up to Aleifu and extended his right arm in a friendly manner. "General Aleifu, the 5-star army welcomes you to join." As Yang Qindong's student, Bai Shuang's ability to see through people's hearts and borrow their power was also exceptional. The best way to defeat the 5-star army was to find some people related to the 5-star army. Only then could they better understand their opponents. Knowing oneself and knowing one's enemy was the only way to win 100 battles. Bai Shuang's sudden appearance caused Aleifu to instinctively become very nervous. He did not know if the other party would keep his promise and go back on his words to kill him. After all, in the current situation, the other party was the boss, and he was just a fish on the chopping board. Now that he did not have any military power in his hands, even if the other party really killed him, who would stand up for him? Where could he go to reason with? He originally thought that he would definitely die, and the other party was settling the score. He wondered if he had made a stupid decision. Should he have chosen to commit suicide just now? At least he would have been able to maintain the last bit of dignity in his life. However, when Bai Shuang extended his right hand, he was puzzled. He realized that the other party did not have any weapon in his hand while he was holding a sharp saber in his right hand. This is a handshake. It is one of the etiquette of our 5-star army. It is a sign of friendship. Could it be that General Aleifu does not want to be my friend? Seeing Aleifu's nervous expression, Bai Shuang said with a smile, "Friend, us." At this moment, Aleifu was even more puzzled. "Yes, you chose to surrender to our 5-star army. Now we are no longer enemies, but friends. Could it be that you are not happy?" Bai Shuang said with a firm tone. Aleifu's eyes lit up. To be able to become friends with a general like Bai Shuang was definitely beneficial to him. At least he did not have to worry about his safety. He immediately put down his saber and imitated Bai Shuang's action and extended his right hand. When the 2 hands shook, he kept repeating, "Yes, we are friends, we are friends." After subduing Aleifu, the several armies merged together and headed straight for the temporary headquarters of the new army. Although they won this battle, the war was not over. It was only the beginning because there were even more powerful enemies standing in front of them that needed to be conquered. Turpan City. The city that had been under siege for several days showed no signs of falling. On the contrary, it was getting more and more ferocious. The 10,000 infantrymen sent out by Turpan City suffered losses after repeated attacks. There were only about 3,000 left. All of this was because of money. After the first batch of city defenders, who were made up of residents, received their due rewards, more and more youths signed up to defend the city, reaching 30,000. With so many people going up the city walls and picking up weapons, the entire Turpan city was impregnable. Of course, the amount of gold and silver paid every day was not small. The mountain of silver in front of the palace square was shrinking at a speed visible to the naked eye. Regarding all of this, Yang Chendong was not worried at all. In his eyes, any problem that could be solved with money was not a problem at all. They had a large amount of territory, as well as 3 production bases in Chichen City, Shaowei Province, and Beginning City. Every day, just the variety of fresh products and items produced was already out of the ordinary. The products produced by the Yang family were all of the best quality, especially the endless variety of new things. They had become the most sought-after goods for various countries and forces. For example, glass products, mirrors, cigarettes, and cosmetics could bring in a lot of profits for the Yang family. Chapter 1254. When money was no longer a shackle to development, it also pushed the wheel of Yangtze's development to become stronger and stronger. With money came endless motivation. When the textile industry was constantly improving and developing, the iron smelting technology had also improved. After a large area of land was also developed, Yangtze's development had become unstoppable. Every day, a large number of military supplies were transported to the front line by water and land. They were transported to the 5-star army, who were about to go to war. They were the most solid backing, helping them to exert their most powerful combat power on the battlefield. Just like all the soldiers of the 5-star army in the first city and the areas west and south of the first city, each of them had a cotton military coat. It could not only keep them warm in the cold weather, but it could also become a life-saving garment. Such a good thing was envied by many of their enemies. However, they could only be envious. After all, no one could be like Yang Xie, who owned tens of millions of acres of cotton land in the entire Southeast Asia. These were also the biggest reasons why Yang Chendong could continue to fight in the north and south. It was precisely because of the sufficient logistical support and the high treatment of the soldiers that more people joined the 5-star army. This allowed the military strength of the 5-star army not to retreat after a long war, but to expand instead. Young Master, 500,000 taels of silver have been used. There are less than 7 million taels of silver left in the square. Beta Persei was not only Yang Chendong's servant, but he was also responsible for his absolute safety. Most of the time, he also acted as an assistant secretary or even a housekeeper. Okay, got it. Yang Chendong did not stop his actions because of Beta Persei's report. At this moment, he was drafting a telegram to send to the new 5-star army. With the sudden addition of White Shuang's 4th Regiment, the originally disadvantageous situation was instantly reversed. Although they were still inferior to the other party in terms of total military strength, they were already on par with each other in terms of combat strength. What followed next was a stalemate. At this moment, it would be a waste to send out all 3 newly formed armies. At this moment, Yang Chendong was thinking about how to counterattack. The first step of the counterattack was to break the siege of Turpan, and then make the necessary preparations for the next step. Yang Chendong was the undisputed leader of Yangtze and the 5-star army. What was a leader? He could see things that ordinary people couldn't see, think of things that ordinary people couldn't think of, and make the right decisions that ordinary people couldn't make. Taking one step and seeing 3 steps ahead was an expert. Taking one step and seeing 5 steps ahead was the style of a general. Taking one step and seeing 10 steps ahead was the style of a true leader. Yang Qindong was the master of taking one step and seeing 10 steps ahead. What he needed to do now was to prepare for the future. Transferring the new 5-star army would not only be able to break the siege of Turpan, but also lead them to launch a counterattack as soon as the other party was defeated. Yang Qindong's personality had never been one to not fight back when scolded or beaten. Perhaps it was because of his military background, but what he liked and was more used to was that if you respect me, I will return the favor tenfold. If you hit me for no reason, I will return the favor for no reason. The kind of thing where you hit me and then turn around and say sorry was absolutely impossible in his eyes. He knew that the strong were supreme and the rules were set by the strong. Yang Qindong already had the capital and ability to ignore the rules and do whatever he wanted. Just like this time, when he sent troops to the Ili region, there was no reason for it. It was just a simple deployment of troops. This was almost unimaginable in the future. After all, when a military power like the United States wanted to make a move on a small country and snatch their resources, they would first put forward a reason in the United Nations. Although this reason was sometimes laughable and unrealistic, it was still necessary to do it. And now, Yang Qindong was even more so. He didn't need any reason. If he wanted to hit you, he would hit you. If you didn't like it, you could fight with him. In the end, when you were beaten down, you would know whose fist was bigger and harder. This kind of thinking was completely different from Confucianism. In Yang Qindong's heart, there was no magnanimity that encompassed all things, nor was there any kind of action where he would withdraw his troops if they said something nice and showed that they had submitted. In his eyes, there was only the concept of enemies and allies. Either you completely submit to him, or you completely submit to him. There was no third choice. With a tough military attitude and great strength, there was no need for any alliances. All they needed was to fight until they conquered the world. When the world was under their control, it would naturally be the time to unify the world. With such a big ambition and goal, how could Yang Qindong be trapped in a small Turpan capital? When many people were worried about whether they would be surrounded if they stayed here and whether there would be danger if the city was breached, what Yang Qindong wanted to do was to use this to attract everyone's attention. How to dispatch more troops, and how to kill the so-called 5-nation coalition army. Yang Qindong hated the coalition army. The 8-nation coalition army had once brought shame to China, and he had not forgotten it. On the battlefield of resisting U.S. aggression and aiding North Korea, it was also the coalition army of more than a dozen countries that wanted to bully China. Although China won in the end, they also paid a heavy price because of it, and the pace of the unification of the motherland had to be slowed down indefinitely. Sometimes Yang Qindong hated that he did not live in that era and could not personally kill the enemy on the battlefield to protect the dignity of the country. At the same time, he was glad that he did not live in that era and did not suffer the humiliation of being oppressed. But no matter what, this was a history that could not be forgotten. Now that Yang Qindong had used his ability to change everything, of course, he had to do it perfectly. As for the coalition army, all he had to do was defeat them. He had to beat them until they threw away their armor and were completely annihilated. He had to beat them until there was no place for them to survive, and everything would naturally end. With Yang Qindong's hatred for the so-called coalition army, it would be strange if he let them off easily after being surrounded by them this time. The pen in his hand fell even faster. In a short time, a telegram was drafted and handed to Beta Persei. Send the telegram to the new 5 armies. Tulu City, Winter had arrived, but no one felt cold. On the contrary, the soldiers here were a little nervous. They all felt like they were about to face a great war. There was only one reason why they felt this way. 5 miles outside Tulu City, a large number of five-star army could be seen training here every day, carrying out various exercises such as encirclement, dispersal, attack, and retreat of cavalry and infantry. It was like a military exercise in the future. Every day, they changed different tricks and played different routines. The shouts of killing could easily be heard from 5 miles away, reaching the eyes of the Ming army soldiers guarding Tulu City. In the beginning, everyone was still very curious. Quite a few soldiers and commoners also walked up the tower with this curiosity. They looked at the constantly moving black dots from afar and heard the battle cries from afar that could not be ignored even though they were still far away. However, as time passed, they got used to it. No one paid attention to it anymore. However, Commander-in-Chief Shi Hung, who was about to send troops to Dawn City, stopped all military operations because of this. Of course, he knew about the training of the five-star army outside the city. Not only did he know, but he also knew that this was a warning from the five-star army. He had also sent people to calculate. When he got the answer that the number of soldiers of the five-star army outside the city had exceeded 200,000, and this number was even going to increase. Shi Heng's original plan to attack the Shi city had to be postponed indefinitely. The shouts were very loud. Just from the shouts of killing, one could hear the strong morale of the five-star army. Facing such a strong army, Shi Heng was not confident that he could win in one strike. Without confidence, he naturally would not send troops. Even though the earliest 200,000 reinforcements of the Ming army had rushed over from Jingdu and a large amount of provisions had been transported, Shi Heng still used the cold weather as an excuse to write a letter to the acting emperor to ask if they would fight in the spring of next year. Although he said that he wanted to ask for instructions, in reality, Shi Heng had already made a decision. No matter what, he would not easily make a move. In any case, military orders could not be given. If he did not want to, he could naturally find a lot of reasons to delay. Thinking about it, when Dawn City was in trouble and was besieged for more than a year, it was still not broken through by the joint forces of the Walla army. Now that the enemy had strong soldiers and horses, how could he defeat the enemy? Because of the change in Shi Heng's thinking, the original plan of Ming's winter offensive had to be suspended. Shi Heng was like a venomous snake hibernating in the dark, waiting for an opportunity. He did not believe that the Ming army could continue this kind of drill every day. It must be known that mobilizing soldiers required money. With so many soldiers going back and forth to train every day, and it was so tiring, they would need more food than usual. He wanted to see how long the five-star army could last. Dawn City's new army headquarters. Yangtze walked with relaxed steps, a smile on his face as he arrived. As soon as he appeared, many people saw him from afar and greeted him warmly. Division Commander Yang is here. Are you here to see our military commander again? Yes, commander who is busy with military affairs. There are too many things that need to be done. I also ordered people to cook some nutritious soup and personally sent it over. How about it? Do you want to have a taste? Yangtze smiled as he looked at the officer who greeted him and said with narrowed eyes. The officer did not dare to answer. This was for their military commander. There was no reason for him to taste it first. He quickly found an excuse that he was too busy and kindly refused. Yangtze chuckled and did not take it seriously. He was just being polite and did not take it seriously. He still walked into the military headquarters. At this time, Tiger's Mane was looking at some information in his hands in a spacious office. His brows were tightly knitted together. When there was a knock on the door, he habitually shouted, "Come in." He first smelled a fragrance, then saw Yang Si walk in with a smile. Chapter 12:55. Oh, you're here. Quick, let me take a look at this list. Is there anyone you're familiar with? As soon as he saw Yang Si appear, Tiger's Mane acted as if he saw his savior. He pulled the other person over and then reached out to take the hot soup from the correspondent behind Yang Si. The correspondent tactfully retreated and closed the door behind him. After there were no outsiders, Yang Si's eyebrows were also tightly knitted together. He looked at the list that was just shoved into his hand and said, "Tiger's Mane, is this the list of military commanders submitted by the Army headquarters?" That's right. Tiger's Mane had already opened the soup pot. He took a deep breath of the fragrance and showed a satisfied expression as he answered. This is too many people. There are 11 candidates for the commander position, but there are only 3 positions. How do we choose? Yang Si finally knew why Tiger's Mane was worried. If it was him, he would also have a headache because there were too many monks and too little porridge. One had to know that anyone who could be on this list was not a mediocre person. Not only were their talents not simple, but their backgrounds were also very complicated. If he didn't do it well and couldn't figure out the relationship, he would offend people. It was fine to offend a gentleman, but if he offended a villain, he could be stabbed in the back at any time. No one would like this feeling. Wrong. It's true that there are 11 people, but it's not 3 positions. There's only 1 position left. Tiger's Mane replied while drinking the hot soup with an expression of enjoyment on his face. I've already reported Lu, Zhuo's name, to the young master. Not only did the young master agree, but he also decided on another position. It's the commander of the new army's 1st Cavalry Division, Kulu. Therefore, there is only 1 empty position left. F***CK, how do we choose? This is too difficult. When he heard that it was only 1 out of 11, Yang Si didn't know what to do. Of course it's hard. Otherwise, why would I be so worried? Tiger's Mane could tell that Yang Si had the intention to retreat, so he immediately cut off his path of retreat. You should know that when our new army is formed, you will lose your position as the logistics commander. It's not like you don't know this. It's related to your future. Tiger's Mane was right. With the continuous development of the 5-star army, the logistics of the army had become the most important issue. Yang Qindong also decided to establish a logistics department for the army. Based on Yang Si's consistent performance, he naturally became the best choice for the logistics commander. Once he was promoted to commander, Yang Si's Daodu would increase from 1 to 2. That would be even more awesome than an ordinary commander. Yang Si was naturally looking forward to it. However, Yang Qindong also said that the logistics department needed to fully cooperate with the establishment of the new regiment. Only when the new regiment was established would it be changed from a division to a division. This was why Tiger's Mane said those words just now. After being checkmated by Tiger's Mane, Yang Si didn't decline and looked at the list seriously. At this moment, the two didn't mention asking for help from Yang Qindong. They knew that the young master was already very busy. If they let him worry about the selection of a commander, wouldn't it show that they were too incompetent? Although these 11 people might have backgrounds behind them and represent different interests, one was Yang Qindong's errand boy since he was young, and the other was a servant of the Yang family. When the two of them joined forces, there were not many people who could make them feel afraid. I'm not familiar with most of the people on this list. How about this? I'll look for Third Brother and ask him to do a detailed investigation of these people. Yang Si also shook his head after looking at it for a while. He hadn't heard of many of the names. If he was asked to make a choice now, it would be a bit difficult. The third brother that Yang Si mentioned was naturally the current director of the Security Bureau, Yang San. Over the years, the Security Bureau's development could be said to be very powerful. Its tentacles extended to all walks of life. It was definitely not a problem to investigate these 11 people with high identities. At the same time, Tiger's Mane, who was also the director of the intelligence department, nodded after listening. Okay, then I'll send a telegram to Yong San in the name of the director. After this telegram was sent out, it suddenly had a great impact on the entire Yangtze and the Five-Star Army. But this is a story for later. New Five-Star Army. At this time, they had just entered 8 Mile City and were taking a short rest here. The 1st Division and the 2nd Division both arrived a step earlier than the new Five-Star Army. At this time, the 1st Division had already entered the battlefield, and the 2nd Division was also preparing to leave the city in 2 days. Only the new Five-Star Army that had just arrived still had to wait for the 2nd Division to set off before they followed. It's just that the plan didn't change as fast as the changes. A telegram was presented to Commander Shi Wanshan, causing his expression to become extremely nervous. Bugnam of Gojoseon is actually surrounded in Torpon City. Looking at this telegram with the word top secret written on it, Shi Wanshan was dumbfounded. His hand that was holding the telegram trembled. He looked up and found that there was no one else around, so he calmed down a little. He knew very well in his heart what kind of sensation and impact this news would cause once it was spread out. He was afraid that the entire battle plan would have to be changed. After all, no one's safety could be compared to Yang Qindong's. Such an important rescue operation was actually handed over to the new Five-Star Army. This is absolute trust and also a heavy responsibility. After reading all the contents of the telegram, Shi Wanshan let out a deep breath. There was some excitement in his eyes, but more than that, there was excitement. As a surrendered general and the commander of the new Five-Star Army, Shi Wanshan had always been under a lot of pressure. Because of their foundation, many high-ranking generals in the new Five-Star Army were surrendered generals. But it was very rare for someone like them to be given the important position of commander right after they surrendered. Shi Wanshan had also heard that his position had already been favored by some people. His appearance was tantamount to breaking some people's wishful thinking. Now, he didn't know how many pairs of eyes were staring at him, waiting for him to make a mistake and kick him into the dust. Because of this, Shi Wanshan had to be very careful and cautious with every move he made. This was to not give out any information that could be used against him and bring him trouble. At the same time, he also had to think about how to make contributions on the battlefield to prove his ability and to slap the mouths of those who looked down on him. He had already thought about how to show his daring side and prove his strength in this battle with the coalition forces of the 5 countries. He never thought that an even better opportunity to prove himself would appear. Come to think of it, winning any battle wouldn't be more influential than resolving the danger of Yang Qindong being besieged. And since this heavy responsibility had fallen on his shoulders, he had to complete it well. This was the first battle since the establishment of the new Five-Star Army, so he had to fight it well. Come, call all the division commanders here for an emergency meeting. Shi Wanshan was very excited, but he didn't blindly order the army to set off immediately. He had to gather everyone's wisdom and strength and hold a meeting to list all the possible problems. If they could solve it, they would solve it. If they couldn't, they would try their best to solve it. Not long after the messenger left, the 4 division commanders of the new Five-Star Army, Ancient River, Li Yu, Meng Chao, and Ning Wenfeng, rushed to the temporary military headquarters and appeared in front of Shi Wanshan. Everyone is here. Take a seat and read the telegram first. Shi Wanshan didn't beat around the bush and went straight to the point. The 4 division commanders were all confused. They didn't understand what kind of telegram could make the military chief so solemn. However, when they finished reading the contents of the telegram, they all stood up in shock. It was obvious that the contents of the telegram were too shocking. Military chief, is this telegram real? The commander of the 2nd Cavalry Division, Li Yu, couldn't help but ask after passing the telegram to the commander of the 3rd Cavalry Division, Meng Chao. But after asking the question, he smiled awkwardly. What kind of joke was this? The telegram was something unique to the 5-star army. Who would know how to make it? Also, even if it was fake, no one would dare to joke about such a thing. Sure, Wanshan didn't ask any questions because there was no need to. He just looked at the 4 division commanders with a serious expression. When they all finished reading the telegram and looked up, his voice rang out. Military intelligence is an order. Bugnam of Gojoseon is surrounded. This is an urgent matter. The fact that the new 5-star army is in charge of solving the situation is a form of trust. So this time, we must perform perfectly. Yes, we must perform perfectly. This is the first battle of the new 5-star army. We must do well. The 4 division masters spoke excitedly. Clearly, they had already realized the importance of this mission. Their enthusiasm and understanding were all aroused. Seeing this, Sure Wanshan pointed at the sand table that was already set up and said, "Come, let's discuss how to solve the siege of Turpan City as quickly as possible." Tai Chin waited until General Bo Mu arrived the next morning. Then he went up to greet him with a guilty expression. Originally, Bo Mu could have arrived last night. However, after receiving the news from Tai Chin, he didn't rush. Instead, he set off with the provisions and other supplies. He was worried that the 5-star army would suddenly attack them and take their provisions. After all, even the Yirkiang cavalry was mysteriously defeated. He wasn't very clear about what had happened. Therefore, his vigilance towards the 5-star army's cavalry was at its highest level. All right, victory and defeat are common in war. No matter what, it's good that you worked hard. Let's talk about the specific situation. Bo Mu rushed to the front of the tent and sat down at the head of the table. He stared at Tai Chin. Chapter 1256. Then, under Chain's introduction, he very objectively reported the matter, including the situation reported by the scouts sent by Alefu. Bo Mu finally knew the whole story and said with a serious expression, "In that case, the 5-star army really has a lot of capable people. The Han people's culture is really broad and profound, and their art of war can't be underestimated. Yes, those 5-star army cavalry didn't fight head-on with us at all. If you charge, they will retreat. If you retreat, they will advance. With all kinds of methods, it is really impossible to guard against them." Tyne seemed to have found a confidant and continued to complain. "All right, although the 5-star army is strong, our Walla cavalry is the elite of the grassland. We don't fear any enemy, and a true warrior will not find excuses for failure." A cold voice came out from Bo Mu's mouth. Although he didn't punish Tyne, he still lost the battle, so he definitely didn't have a good expression. Yes, Tyne became obedient after being reprimanded. Bo Mu didn't look at Tyne again, and instead pondered. He was considering the advantages and disadvantages of both sides. After thinking for a long time, he said with a confident tone, "Since the other side's weakness is that they don't have enough troops, then we will take advantage of this. Come, call all the generals over." The news that Bo Mu had arrived with 70,000 Walla cavalry was immediately seen by the scouts and sent back. In the 5-star army's tent, Su He's expression became much more serious. He already knew from the information that Bo Mu was very cautious. When he was guarding chaotic Wells City, he didn't make a single mistake. He was really one of the most difficult enemies to deal with in the Walla army. This Bo Mu definitely won't advance rashly unless he doesn't send troops. Once he sends troops, he will definitely advance steadily. Everyone, do you have any good ideas? Suhi hadn't fought with Bo Muir before, so he naturally didn't have much experience. His gaze fell on the other military officers. Everyone was the same as Suhi, who had never fought with Bo Muir before. However, this wasn't the first time they had come into contact with the Walla army. Strictly speaking, the 5-star army had never lost in a real war. This time, they firmly believed that victory was theirs. The commander of the Far Eastern Army's 1st Cavalry Division, Dai Qua, was the first to express his opinion. Counter soldiers with arms, water, with an earth weir. We'll just have to carry a head on our shoulders and see who's the real deal on the battlefield. This wasn't really an opinion, just a kind of attitude. To this, the other generals all nodded in agreement. Suhi knew that there wouldn't be a better way to deal with the enemy in a short period of time. Thus, he said, "All right, since that's the case, we'll just stay still and see what methods they have." Suhi didn't mention the matter of taking the initiative to attack, because even if the Far Eastern Army's 1st Cavalry Division, Bai Shuang's 4 regiments, and Ma Xiangshan's Light Cavalry Regiment were added, he only had 50,000 soldiers. Compared to the Walla Cavalry, there was still a large gap. With such a large difference in strength, if they were to take the initiative to attack, the first to suffer the same losses would be him. After deciding on the strategy of staying still, the other generals walked out of the tent one by one. When Bai Shuang was about to leave with the others, Suhi called out to him. Only the 2 of them were left in the tent. A nervous and anxious voice sounded. "Commander Bai, the 1st Cavalry Division is currently heavily surrounded. What's the situation like?" I don't know either." Bai Shuang shook his head. He indeed didn't take the initiative to contact Division Commander Tian, who, although he was a member of the 1st Cavalry Division, his battlefield wasn't there, so he didn't pay much attention to it. According to the radio regulations set by Yang Chendong, without the permission of the higher-ups, the army was not allowed to communicate privately. This was an ironclad rule. Once Tiger's Mane, the commander of the Ming army, forgot about this matter and took the initiative to send a message to the new 2nd Army. He wanted to ask if they had any thoughts of surrendering to Ming. Later, when Yang Chendong found out, Tiger's Mane was punished and the transmitter was even more miserable. He was directly transferred back to the headquarters to an unimportant department. Using Yang Chendong's words at that time, "The commander doesn't know the rules of confidentiality, but you, the translator, don't know? Don't you know how to warn and stop?" Even Tiger's Mane was punished with a warning, so no one else dared to make a mistake. This was also the reason why the armies and divisions didn't know that Turpan was surrounded. From a certain point of view, this was very important to stabilize the overall situation. The result was that there were some things that Yang Chendong wanted everyone to know, so they could know. If he didn't want them to know, then no one would know. Without permission, they couldn't take the initiative to send a message to the 1st Cavalry Division. Suhi wanted to understand the situation on the other side through White Shuang. Although he and Tian, who were in a competitive relationship most of the time, the 2 of them were both members of the 5-star Army, and they had long since become friends. But he didn't expect that White Shuang didn't know about this matter. Suhi nodded and said, "From the looks of it, the situation on the other side shouldn't be serious. The 6th young master also doesn't want us to send reinforcements. It shouldn't be a problem. It shouldn't be a problem. After all, 80,000 cavalrymen surrounded less than 20,000 people." The huge difference in strength made it impossible not to worry. It was reasonable for He to have such thoughts. When White Shuang heard these words, he smiled confidently. Commander Su, thank you for your concern for the 1st Cavalry Division. But you can rest assured that 80,000 people won't be enough to defeat us. You're that confident? Looking at White Shuang's expression, He originally wanted to ask why he was so confident, but he was afraid that this would cause White Shuang to dislike him, so he changed his approach. That's right, White Shuang replied confidently. If these 80,000 people suddenly appeared and attacked the 1st Cavalry Division in a sneak attack, then there might be some problems. But now, he was smart and immediately understood what White Shuang meant. He asked with a surprised expression, "Oh, Commander White, are you saying that Commander Tian, who purposely attracted the enemy's attention?" At this point, there was no need for White Shuang to hide anything. He immediately replied, "Yes, all of this is teacher's idea. The enemy has 1,000,000 soldiers, and we don't have the advantage in terms of numbers. When it comes to understanding the terrain, we are at a disadvantage. That's why we lured the enemy out of its hole. It's hard for some people to think that this is a good opportunity. Actually, from the moment they split up, they were destined to fail." White Shuang wasn't talking nonsense. He had already asked Yang Qindong about this. At first, he didn't know about this plan. When he knew that he could send reinforcements out of Hobok Seri, his first thought was to reinforce the 1st Cavalry Division. It wasn't far from Hobok Seri, and it was his old unit. It was Yang Qindong who sent him a telegram and explained the situation. He also said that Commander Tian, who was already prepared, and he didn't need to worry. However, the other 5-star army units were relatively weaker and needed his help. For the sake of confidentiality, Yang Qindong only told Tianhu about it. Everyone else was kept in the dark. White Shuang also saw that the situation was basically stabilized and told Commander Suhi the truth. He finally knew what was going on. He sighed and said with a face full of admiration, "As expected, only the 6th young master can do something like this. This time the 5-star army is going to shoot themselves in the foot." Sui didn't ask how the world's 1st Cavalry Division was able to face 80,000 people with 16,000 people and was confident in winning 1 against 5. This was because he believed that this was a team that could create miracles. Now, it was just the appearance of another miracle. As a matter of fact, the 1st Cavalry Division was well prepared. When they left Hobok Seri, they had brought enough food and equipment. At that time, Commander Tian, who also didn't have enough confidence that they would attract the enemy. He was just following Yang Qindong's orders. He didn't expect that the enemy would be 80,000 Ili cavalry. When the scouts at the periphery of the Ala Mountain Pass reported this to Tian, he was really excited. He was really worried that even if they could attract the enemy, the number of enemies was too small. It wouldn't be enough. Now, 80,000 Ili cavalry was enough to fill the 1st Cavalry Division's stomach. Of course, if the 80,000 Liangli cavalry that surrounded them knew about this, they would probably be fuming mad. After all, they had 80,000 Ili cavalry. Tung Mushi, who didn't know that the 1st Cavalry Division was already prepared, was looking forward to the arrival of the 5-star army's reinforcements. In his eyes, the 16,000 soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division were already food on a plate. What he needed to do now was to attract more 5-star army, and then fight a big battle to obtain more victory. However, he sent out a lot of scouts, but he didn't see any sign of the 5-star army's reinforcements. This made Tung Mushi, who was originally very confident, feel worried for some reason. Tung Mushi's worry increased day by day. A few days later, he still didn't see any reinforcements from the 5-star army. Instead, he saw the general of the Tushi army with the banner of the Turpan army. Chapter 1257. After Tushi's camp was raided, he immediately fled. Not only that, he also gathered his troops along the way. Now, the number of cavalry under his command had recovered to 15,000. Although it was only half of his peak, he still had hope in his heart. That was the 80,000 Ely cavalry at the Ala Mountain Pass. Tushi, who had already lost, should have done something to make up for his mistakes. However, after being beaten by the 5-star army, coupled with the fact that he did not have enough troops, he did not dare to take the initiative to find trouble with the 5-star army. After thinking about it, he came all the way west to meet up with the Ely cavalry. In Tushi's eyes, if there was a 5-star army on the battlefield that was the easiest to deal with, it would undoubtedly be the heavily surrounded 1st Cavalry Division. Attacking this place was also the most likely way to gain merit. Tushi's arrival made Tengmushi know a lot of things, but because of this, he became unhappy. Why? It was obvious that this person was here to steal merit from him. Who would be happy if it was someone else? There was no need to mention the fact that the 15,000 Turkmen cavalry were in an extremely sorry state. Their camp had been raided, and their rations were long gone. At this moment, they were all starving. The moment they entered the camp, they started to clamor for food, looking like hungry ghosts that had been reincarnated from starvation. Tengmushi was confident that even without any external help, it would be easy for his 80,000 cavalrymen to deal with the 16,000 cavalrymen of the 1st Cavalry Division. However, since the other party was here, he could not just ignore them. After all, they were in an alliance, and everyone was considered to be allies. Men, prepare some hot food for the Turfan cavalry. Give them some tents, and let them rest. In front of Tushi, Tengmushi gave his orders. Someone immediately went to do it. However, Tushi did not leave immediately. Instead, he came in front of Tengmushi and said, "Old General Teng, what we need now is not rest, but battle. The current situation is completely different from what we expected. The 5-star army doesn't intend to engage in a large-scale battle at the Ala Mountain Pass. They've already made their move. Now that there's no need for this bait to exist, I'm willing to declare war on the 1st Cavalry Division. At the same time, only by resolving the battle here can we send our troops back and join up with the other allied forces to launch a pincer attack on the 5-star army." Tushi wanted to ask for a battle and said it in such a dignified manner. Even Tengmushi could not find any reason to refuse. In his heart, he was also very worried that the other allied forces would be heavily injured by the 5-star army, which did not play by the rules. "All right, I'll grant your request. However, you have just arrived from afar. You should rest for a day first. Once you have recovered, we will discuss the matter of the battle tomorrow." Tengmushi agreed, but he did not immediately send out his troops. Previously, he had surrounded the 1st Cavalry Division and did all the defensive work to prevent the enemy from breaking out. Now, it was time to change it to an attack. Some of the military arrangements also needed to be adjusted. Tushi, who only wanted to ask for a battle and get a share of the credit, saw that Tengmushi had agreed to his request and left the tent with a satisfied expression. After that, Tengmushi immediately ordered someone to call the other generals over. He needed to discuss a new battle plan and change from defense to offense. In the headquarters of the 1st Cavalry Division, compared to the icy cold outside, it was as warm as spring. This time, the purpose of this operation was to lure the enemy and not to go on a pincer attack like before. Therefore, the various military resources they brought were extremely abundant. Just the amount of charcoal they brought was sufficient. At this moment, the charcoal was burning in the tent, releasing a unique warm aura. Division Commander Tian, who was currently sitting not far away from the charcoal brazier, with his eyes closed, there were also 4 other regimental commanders in the tent. They all maintained the same posture and did not speak. It was as if they were waiting for something. "They're here, men." Outside the tent, the 1st Cavalry Division's reconnaissance battalion commander, Helu walked into the tent with an excited expression. As he entered, the 10 eyes of the 5 people in the tent instantly opened, and their gazes shot straight at him. "Division commander, regimental commanders, the enemy's camp has indeed sent a group of enemies. There are about 15,000 of them, and they are currently cooking in the camp. Moreover, many of the generals have left their posts and are heading towards the main tent." After Helu finished speaking, he looked at the division commander with a gaze of admiration. The situation, he reported, was surprisingly similar to Tian Hu's analysis. Seeing Helu's expression of admiration, Tian Hu laughed heartily and said, "Don't look at me like that. This is all the information that teacher sent me in advance. I'm just saying it based on my feelings." Ha ha ha. Although it was said that he had received the information first before coming up with such an analysis, to be able to guess the situation so accurately was not something an ordinary person could do. Tian Hu's words caused everyone to laugh. Then they quickly quieted down and focused their gaze on Division Commander Tian Hu. "All right, everyone, don't look at me like that. Since everything is going according to the previous plan, what are you waiting for? Let's split up and move. Remember, our 1st Cavalry Division does not make a move. Once we make a move, we have to show our might. We've been surrounded for more than a month. Now is the time for us to collect our interest." When Tian Hu said this, his body revealed a strong self-confidence. His gaze was filled with incomparable confidence. That was, victory would definitely belong to them. With 16,000 people, they were going to fight 80,000 people. No, it was 95,000 people. If it were any other army, they would not be able to defend well even if they wanted to. However, Suhi wanted to take the initiative to attack. Just this boldness alone was not something an ordinary person could do. Of course, sometimes fighting a war not only depended on courage, but also on strength. Did the 1st Cavalry Division have this kind of strength? The answer was, of course, yes. They had this kind of strength. Although they were not an all-firearms army like the Cold Vanguard Army, they still had advanced weapons that other cavalry divisions did not have. For example, they had the Big Dipper crossbow. The full name of the Big Dipper crossbow was the Big Dipper steel crossbow. It was a batch of cold weapons manufactured in Yangtze's military factory. Its biggest advantage was that it could fire 7 arrows consecutively. Moreover, its range could reach up to 150 paces, which was about 120 meters. If it were not for the fact that some parts of the Big Dipper crossbow were very troublesome to manufacture, it would have been supplied to the entire army long ago. However, it could not be used by the entire army. For example, the 1st Cavalry Division was equipped with the Big Dipper crossbow. In order to complete this mission, Tian Hu brought along the Big Dipper crossbow. At this moment, every soldier was equipped with one. As for the bows and arrows, each soldier was equipped with 10 sets, which was a total of 70 arrows. In total, the number of bows and arrows alone was close to 1 million. This was quite a shocking number. It was also the entire stock of the 1st Cavalry Division. Even if Yangtze's military factory were to manufacture these, it would take more than a year of hard work by thousands of people in a special department. Using so many bows and arrows on a single enemy, one could imagine what kind of shocking result it would have. The reason why Yang Qindong dared to put the 1st Cavalry Division in such a dangerous situation was because of the Big Dipper crossbow. Such a good weapon, whether it was for defense or offense, was a powerful weapon. Knowing the strength of this weapon, Yang Qindong had already ordered Yangtze's military factory to speed up production. It was a pity that what Yangtze lacked the most were iron and copper ores. Although they had occupied a lot of territory and obtained some similar resources, they had given them to the Navy first. In comparison, the demand was greater than the supply. Otherwise, the strength of the five-star army would increase by more than a level. With the Big Dipper crossbow, the 1st Cavalry Division would be like a tiger that had grown wings. After Division Commander Tian, who gave the order, the 4 commanders stood at attention and walked out of the camp one by one. Following that, the various regiments quickly gathered. Tian Hu and Recon Battalion Commander, Hu Helu each found a regiment and joined the army. A crazy counterattack that had been prepared for a long time began. According to the previous battle plan, the 4 regiments split into 4 different directions and began their counterattack. The first to face the enemy was the 3rd Regiment commander, Hu and Lu. Hu Su-er had been a subordinate of Tua Tuabuhua, and Tua Tuabuhua had died at the hands of the Walla cavalry. Because of this, Hu Su-er hated anyone who was on good terms with the Walla more than anyone else. When he led a regiment of 4,000 elite cavalrymen out of the camp, they charged towards the 10,000 elite cavalrymen on the west side like wild horses. 3rd Commander, we have to move quickly. After we deal with this, we still have to help the other regiments attack the Southern Empire. Let's end this quickly. Vice Division Commander Hu and Vice Division Commander Lu urged their horses forward as they spoke to Hubo, who was also charging forward. Understood. After Hubo, agreed. Her expression did not change, but she waved her whip even faster, leading the 3 regiments to charge towards Ili Bali's army 8 li away. To Mu, she was quite good at leading his troops. Out of the 80,000 soldiers under him, he sent out 40,000 to guard the east, west, and north sides of the Ala Mountain Pass. The east and west sides each had 10,000 cavalrymen, while the north side was facing Hobokseri City, so he sent 20,000 cavalrymen. The other 40,000 cavalrymen were placed in the south, which was the direction of Ili Bali. This was to ensure that if the situation turned bad, he could retreat quickly. At the same time, in order to prevent the 1st Cavalry Division from suddenly breaking out, he kept the distance between the 2 sides at least 8 miles. This way, even if there were any movements, his troops would have some time to prepare. Chapter 1258. Just like now, the 8 Li charge didn't escape the notice of the 10,000 cavalry on the Eastern Front. When the scouts informed the army of the 5-star army's charge, the 10,000 cavalry who were prepared immediately donned their battle armor, picked up their sabers, and mounted their war horses. What's going on? Why are they attacking in broad daylight? And when the general isn't here? After a deputy general mounted his horse, he could already vaguely see a torrent of smoke and dust charging towards them from afar. An unnatural look of fear flashed across his eyes. The general went to the main tent to participate in a meeting. The remaining 2 deputy generals looked at each other and expressed their intention to fight. After all, the scouts reported that the enemy only had around 4,000 cavalry. They had 10,000 cavalry here. Even if they were unprepared, they still had the confidence to win against 2 times their number. However, for safety's sake, one of the deputy generals said to a young scout, "Hurry to the main tent and inform the general that the 5-star army is about to break through from the east." The young scout turned around and left. Around 5 minutes after he left, the 4,000 cavalry of the 1st Cavalry Division's 3rd Regiment appeared. It was still the same formation of the tip of the arrow. The 4,000 cavalry were divided into small groups of 30 or 40. They formed over 100 groups and charged forward. Looking from afar, the horses galloped, and the red flags fluttered. It was quite a sight. They overestimate themselves. Everyone, draw your sabers and charge. When they saw that the enemy only had around 4,000 cavalry, the two deputy generals revealed a confident expression. They already couldn't wait to make a big contribution. If they could deal with the 5-star army's cavalry before the general returned, the merit would definitely be given to the two of them. As the two deputy generals drew their sabers and brandished their reins, the rest of the Ely cavalry also followed suit and charged forward while shouting and yelling. Compared to the third group that had come from afar, it was only slightly more powerful. Facing an army that was twice their size, the 4,000 5-star army's cavalry did not show any fear. They were the strongest cavalry in the world. They had the strongest cold weapons, the 7-star crossbow. They had the sharpest saber and the will to fight. They did not fear any enemy. Prepare to fire. When Hubo noticed that the enemy was only 1 li away from her, she shouted loudly. Following this shout, a small crossbow appeared in the hands of every soldier. It was the Big Dipper crossbow. Everyone, slow down your horses and wait for the enemy to come within 150 steps before launching a progressive attack. According to the requirements of the usual training, the team leaders of the arrow tip began to make various preparations according to the training outline. The 4,000 5-star Army cavalrymen, who were originally charging at an extremely fast speed, seemed to have taken some sort of medicine at the same time. Their speed began to slow down. The deputy generals, who were currently being attacked by the other side, immediately understood what was going on. One of them immediately laughed loudly and said, "Did you see that? In the face of our charge, the 5-star army has admitted defeat. Come on, let's use this opportunity to charge forward and settle this with a single battle." At that moment, the cavalry's morale was greatly boosted. When they saw the 5-star army slow down, they instinctively thought that the enemy was afraid of them. They immediately shouted loudly and increased the speed of their whips. Because of this, the distance between the two sides did not decrease due to the 5-star army slowing down or even stopping. On the contrary, the distance between the two sides was still rapidly closing. 300 meters, 200 meters, 150 meters. As the distance between the two sides grew closer and closer, they could even clearly see the cold gleam of the enemy's saber under the sunlight. The distance between the two sides was less than 100 meters, and it was approaching the distance of 80 meters, 70 meters. "Fire!" Hubo shouted out loud. Following that, arrows were shot out like a swarm of locusts towards the charging enemy cavalrymen. At such a distance, the cavalrymen also began to reflect the arrows. In a cavalry battle, this often meant that close combat was about to begin. Most of the time, arrows were just the prelude to close combat, so no one took it seriously. Xiu, xiu, xiu. Xiu, xiu, xiu. Both sides shot back and forth. It seemed very lively, but the results were very different. The cavalrymen's arrows were blind. The only ones who were accurate were the sharpshooters. However, most of these arrows were dodged by the soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division, who were adept at horse riding. On the other hand, the crossbows of the 4,000 and 500 star troopers were indeed fixed-point attacks. Every crossbow shot had a clear target. In addition, they were already very stable with the mechanism in their hands. Moreover, they were shooting in parallel. Every arrow shot down was flying towards the target at high speed. It was as if they would not return until they had achieved something. The cavalrymen of the Ely army had never seen such a thing before. It was only when the 1,000 cavalrymen at the front were all hit by the arrows and fell from their horses that they finally realized the power of the 5-star army's archery. However, it was clearly too late for them to react. Now that they had entered the range of the Big Dipper crossbow, there was no way to save them. As more and more crossbow bolts were fired, more and more of the Ely cavalry were killed by the bolts or fell to the ground from their injuries. The so-called advantage in numbers had now become a living target for the five-star army. The more people there were, the higher the probability of the arrows hitting the target, and the more cavalrymen fell from their horses. What's going on? When he realized that the number of cavalrymen at the front was decreasing and that he, who was originally in the middle, was about to become the vanguard, one of the deputy generals revealed a puzzled expression. In an instant, this thought flashed through his mind. Before he could react, a crossbow arrow had already pierced through the air and headed straight for his head. It must be said that the deputy general was indeed different from normal soldiers. When he saw a black shadow approaching, he instinctively swung his sword. The crossbow arrow collided with the cavalry sword, and after a crisp ding sound, the arrow flew to the side. However, before the deputy general could react, another crossbow arrow flew over. Another crisp sound of collision sounded, and the crossbow arrow fell to the ground again. However, the third, fourth, and fifth crossbow arrow quickly followed. It was clear that the five-star army's cavalrymen had noticed this deputy general's extraordinariness, and he became the target of their care. Facing the seemingly endless crossbow arrows flying towards him, the deputy general was shocked, but at the same time, he could not understand. The enemy only had 4,000 cavalrymen, so how could they continuously fire crossbow arrows? The answer was that no one would answer him, and he would bring this question to hell. Perhaps there would be a kind-hearted person who would explain it to him. However, the reality was that after a few rounds of crossbow arrows, the deputy general finally couldn't dodge in time, and an arrow pierced his heart. His body staggered, and after a breath of time, he fell from his horse. The death of this deputy general caused many of the other cavalrymen to reveal an expression of shock. Even their deputy general had died in battle, and at this moment, they were still at least 30 steps away from the five-star army. This seemed to have become a death zone, and no one could jump over it, and no one could step into it. After a series of defeats and losses, the cavalry finally began to retreat. In their eyes, these opponents were not human at all, especially the speed of their arrows, which was beyond their imagination. Even when the Mongol Empire was at its peak, their archers could not maintain such speed. The morale of the elite army's cavalry had plummeted after they had suffered heavy losses. They were no longer as high-spirited as before. Some of them had even turned around and left. They wanted to maintain a sufficient distance from the five-star army. Want to leave? A mocking look flashed across Hubo Er's face. What did they think the 3rd Regiment was? That they could come and go as they pleased? Was this really a market? Come on, boys. It's time for us to charge. Charge! Hubo put away the 7-star crossbow in his hands and pulled out his cavalry blade. With a loud roar, he led the charge towards the retreating cavalrymen. In all honesty, the cavalrymen were not truly afraid. They only wanted to retreat a little and maintain a sufficient distance from the five-star army, so as to not let the crossbows unleash their full power. However, under Hubo Er's charge, they seemed to have become a defeated army and wanted to turn around and flee. Behind them came the rumbling of hooves, and the snow that was kicked up covered their bodies, giving off a feeling of heavenly soldiers descending from the heavens. The 4,000 cavalrymen of the five-star army were filled with fighting spirit. With the help of the 7-star crossbows, their morale was greatly boosted. Seeing that their commander had taken the lead, how could they be courteous? All of them kept their crossbows and pulled out their cavalry blades, roaring as they charged forward. On the other hand, the Ely cavalry's morale had fallen to the lowest point. They only wanted to turn around and retreat a little. However, the five-star army took advantage of this opportunity. Hearing the battle cries behind them, they looked around and saw that their comrades were frantically fleeing. Occasionally, there were some who wanted to resist. However, when they saw that the situation was about to change, they could only sigh in their hearts before turning around and fleeing together with them. In this way, the retreat became a true retreat. This trick made many of the Lianli cavalry feel extremely depressed. However, they did not have any way to turn the situation around. This was because if they stopped and dared to turn around, they would have to face the cold blades and merciless killing intent of the 5-star Corps cavalry. Chapter 1259. An army was defeated like a mountain when two armies fought, as long as their morale was still there and they were still charging forward. Even the side with fewer people could still cause enough damage to the side with more people. It wasn't impossible for them to turn defeat into victory. After all, in history, there were countless instances of people winning with fewer people. However, once the morale was destroyed and they couldn't form an effective counterattack, then there was really no other way. The more people there were, the easier it was to cause chaos, and it wouldn't help the overall situation. Just like the 3 great battles during the liberation period, the reason why the National Army was defeated was because their morale was at an all-time low. In the process of capturing captives, a squad could often capture 300 to 400 enemies, creating countless miracles. The current situation was similar to the National Army fleeing in defeat. Without command, morale, and fighting spirit, the only thing the cavalry could do was to run. They didn't need to run too fast. As long as they were a little bit faster than their comrades, there would be a chance for them to escape with their lives. Everyone only cared about running away. No one thought about fighting, and no one thought about resisting. That was tantamount to putting themselves to death. Only those who ran faster than them would benefit. With such a thought, those who could escape fled with all their might. Those who were slow simply threw away their weapons and knelt down to surrender. They had heard that on the battlefield, under normal circumstances, the 5-star army wouldn't kill any captives. After a series of attacks, only less than 3,000 of the 10,000 elite cavalry managed to escape. Among them, the number of cavalry who gave up on escaping reached close to 5,000, far exceeding the number of the 3rd Regiment soldiers. In other words, there were only about 2,000 cavalry who were killed on the battlefield. This was the importance of morale and fighting spirit, and this was also the reason why they could win with fewer people. If these captives resisted with all their might, even if they couldn't win, they could still inflict heavy damage to the 5-star army. When people are united, Mount Tai will move. This sentence could be said by anyone, but when it came to the crucial moment, there were too few people who could do such a thing. Battalion commanders who and Lu take 2 battalions with you to watch over the captives and clean up the battlefield. Collect as many crossbow bolts as you can. Hubo shouted to Hu Lu before leading the other 8 battalions to chase after the fleeing Ili Belly cavalry. According to the military plan, defeating the enemy in front of them was not their goal. Their true opponent was the 80,000 cavalrymen led by Tung Mushi. Following the defeat of the 10,000 Ili cavalry soldiers on the west side, the Ili cavalry soldiers on the east and north sides were also defeated by Commander Lu Duo of the 2nd Regiment and Commander Gong Feng of the 5th Regiment, respectively. For a time, the battlefield was filled with scenes of the cavalry fleeing in disorder. Not far behind them, the soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division, who were full of vigor and morale, were chasing after them. Within General Tung Mushi's tent, he was discussing with a few important generals on how to deal with the 5-star army. All of a sudden, scouts appeared one after another, bringing bad news. When he heard that the defensive lines on the east, west, and north had been broken in just a short hour, Tung Mushi's face revealed a look of disbelief. That was 30,000 cavalrymen. Even if they were 30,000 pigs, they couldn't possibly be wiped out by the five-star army in such a short time. He wanted to say that this was fake news, but seeing the looks of fear on the faces of the scouts, Tung Mushi had no choice but to believe it. At that moment, he broke out in cold sweat. Could it be that the strength of the 1st Cavalry Division was really that strong? With 80,000 cavalrymen, they could not even suppress an enemy that was 5 times their number? Tung Mushi's thoughts were still wandering when another scout rushed into the tent, kneeling on one knee as he reported, "General, there are 5-star army cavalrymen outside the tent. They are challenging us. They even dared to come here." At this moment, Tung Mushi's entire body was emitting a murderous aura. It was as though he had become a few decades younger. The demeanor and aura of an experienced general was completely released at this moment. Previously, because the enemy had suddenly attacked and the main general was not in the tent, the 5-star army had taken advantage of the situation and caught him off guard. However, now that he was here, the 5-star army still dared to come. Weren't they courting death? How many people did they send? Tung Mushi's expression was a little sinister as he asked with a murderous aura. Reporting to General, the enemy has about 4,000 people. Although the scout did not want to say this number, he had to report it truthfully because of his duty. 4,000. 4,000. Ha ha ha. When he heard that there were only 4,000 cavalrymen, Tung Mushi could not help but laugh out loud. He had already retired from the army and returned home to live in peace for many years. How could his army be looked down upon like this? Currently, he still had 40,000 cavalrymen in his tent. If he included Tushi's cavalrymen, it would be a total of 55,000 people. The enemy only had 4,000 cavalrymen. How could they dare to provoke him? They were truly overestimating themselves. Or did they have something to rely on? At this moment, Tung Mushi fully displayed the demeanor of an experienced general. He quickly calmed down and waved his hand towards the generals in the tent. "Let's go and see if this so-called 1st Cavalry Division really has 3 heads and 6 arms. Is it really invulnerable to swords and spears?" The generals had been suppressing the anger in their hearts for a long time. The 5-star army's cavalrymen actually chose to attack when they were not in the camp. This made them think that the enemy was afraid of them. They believed that if they were in the camp earlier, the outcome of the battle would have been different. Now, it was time to let the 5-star army know how powerful they were. Tung Mushi took the lead, and the other generals walked out of the tent. They rode their horses to the outskirts of the camp. From afar, they could see the 5-star flag fluttering in the wind. Although they were still far away, those who could become generals were all veterans. How could they not see through the enemy's strength? When they saw that the 5-star army only had around 4,000 people, they were all shocked. Could it be that they didn't know that there was a huge difference in strength between the two sides? Could it be that they had really come to throw their lives away? After the shock, everyone's gaze landed on great General Tung Mushi. At this moment, Tung Mushi was emitting an indescribable anger. In his view, this was a provocation from the 5-star army. It was also a type of blasphemy. It was a type of disrespect to the cavalrymen. "Since you want to die so much, I will let you know the price of doing so. Come, which general is willing to lead the troops to battle?" Tung Mushi shouted in anger. "This general is willing to go." A burly warrior stood up. His name was Emoku, and he was a famous general in the Ili army. He was also one of the young men that Tung Mushi valued the most. "Good. General Emoku is extremely courageous. I'll give you 5,000 cavalry. No matter what, you must eliminate the enemy in the shortest time possible." Tung Mushi's gaze landed on Emoku's face. There was excitement and expectation in his eyes. Understood. Mo immediately cupped his fists in acknowledgement and went to gather the troops. The 5,000 cavalry were quickly prepared. Soon after, the war drums sounded. Mo, who had shouted the word kill, took the lead and led the 5,000 cavalry to charge towards the 5-star military formation. Tushi appeared beside General Tung Mushi at some point in time and looked over. He did not know that the Ili army's 3 defensive lines had been broken. Thus, he was curious about what the 4,000 cavalrymen of the 5-star army wanted to do. Were they here to die? He envied Tung Mushi's good luck. There were actually people who took the initiative to come and die. If such a thing happened to him, how good would it be? It would be a great contribution. Tushi looked at Tung Mushi with envy. However, he quickly put away those thoughts. In his gaze, he saw the army cavalrymen fall from their horses as if they were under a spell. Even the brave warrior, Mo, only struggled for a moment before falling to the ground. After leaving behind nearly 2,000 corpses, the 5,000 cavalrymen retreated in less than an hour. From the moment they started to retreat, they did not even touch the blades of the 5-star army's cavalrymen. It's a crossbow, a crossbow. They have a weapon that can shoot crossbows continuously. One of the generals was very observant. He finally discovered the source of the problem and immediately shouted out loud, "A weapon that can shoot crossbows continuously." Tung Mushi's eyes lit up when he heard that. This was definitely a good thing. Once the Ili army was equipped with such a weapon, where in the world could they not go? Who would be a match for them? He originally thought that the 5-star army was here to die. He did not expect that they would have such a weapon. Tung Mushi finally understood the whole story. Presumably, this was also the reason why the other 3 lines were broken in such a short time. The enemy has a crossbow that can shoot crossbows continuously. Tushi also heard the shout, and his eyes lit up. Excitement enveloped his entire body. He was thinking that if he could snatch these crossbow bolts and present them to the king, it would definitely be a great merit. His position in the army would also rise. What a happy and glorious thing it would be. After a few breaths, he made up his mind. He must snatch these crossbow tools. Even if he could only get a third of them, it would definitely be a great merit. Old General Tung, this one is not talented and cannot bear to see the Ili army suffer losses. I am willing to lead the army forward and make a military pledge that we will not return without victory. Chapter 1260. Tushi volunteered to fight not because he thought the 5-star army was easy to bully, but because he was so captivated by the 7-star crossbow that he forgot all the dangers. How could such a small trick escape Tung Mushi's sharp eyes? How was he asking to fight? He was clearly trying to steal the credit. He was just spying on the 7-star crossbow. Since that was the case, how could he let such a good thing fall into his opponent's hands? It was true that they were allied forces now, but once the 5-star army was defeated and retreated, they would naturally still be enemies since they were all living in this place. Even if it was for the future, he could not let such a good thing fall into his hands. Cough, General Tushi, you just came from afar and haven't had a good rest. How can you fight now? Without waiting for Tung Mushi to finish, Tushi interrupted. How can we rest when dealing with the invading 5-star army? Our Turpan cavalry wants to do our part. I hope old General Tung can fulfill our wish. He even brought out the banner of the Turpan army to pressure Tung Mushi. It could be imagined that if he did not let Tushi fight, even if they won this battle, Tushi would probably complain to the 5-star army and point out his faults. Now was not the time to split. The most important thing was that the Big Dipper crossbows were indeed powerful. Someone needed to bear the risk. Seeing Tushi's firm attitude, Tung Mushi hesitated for a moment before nodding. Fine. However, according to the ratio, you can only send out 5,000 cavalrymen at most. Too many won't do. 5,000 was a little too little. Based on Tushi's intentions, it would be better if the entire army was mobilized. However, Tung Mushi had already made a concession. If he did not agree and angered Tung Mushi, he would not even have the chance to send out troops. Tung Mushi had no choice but to agree. All right, 5,000 it is. I will go back and prepare. After Tushi left, Tung Mushi took the opportunity to give orders to the other generals. After naming 3 generals and giving each of them 5,000 cavalrymen, a confident smile appeared on his face again. His 15,000 cavalrymen and Tushi's 5,000 cavalrymen made a total of 20,000 cavalrymen, 5 times the number of the enemy. Even if the enemy had a powerful killing weapon like the Big Dipper crossbow, the advantage of numbers was not for nothing. He was confident that the victory of this battle would belong to him. About half an hour later, General Tushi arrived with 5,000 cavalrymen he had personally selected. These were the elites of the 15,000 cavalrymen. He had already instructed them that killing the enemy was secondary. The most important thing was to seize the enemy's crossbow weapons. Whoever seized one would be rewarded with a great merit and would be promoted by 3 ranks and rewarded with 100 taels of silver. Opposite Ely Bailey's army was Tae-Mu-Er's regiment, which was personally led by Division Commander Tian, who, Tae-Mu-Er, had just defeated 5,000 of the enemy's cavalry and killed 2,000 of them. Clearly, he was still not satisfied. At this moment, he saw that the enemy was constantly mobilizing their troops, but no one was rushing out. He said anxiously, "Master, why aren't they coming out? Are they really afraid?" "Ha, of course they are afraid, but they will also come out. We only have 4,000 cavalry. This is why they are confident that they can win. As for why they are not attacking now, it is because they are mobilizing their troops. 1st Regiment Commander, inform the soldiers to check their weapons. The battle is about to begin." Things were as Tian had guessed. After the 15,000 cavalry from Ibali and the 5,000 cavalry from Tulyafin had gathered, they opened the gates of the main camp, and the 20,000 cavalry marched out. From afar, they looked very imposing. If it was any other army with only 4,000 cavalry, they would have been so scared that their legs would have turned to jelly. How could they still talk about fighting? However, when the same thing happened to the soldiers of Ibali's army, their eyes were wide open and filled with murderous intent. They were the strongest cavalry in the world. They had the most powerful weapon in their hands, the 7-star crossbow. This was what they were relying on. So what if the enemy outnumbered them by 5 to 1? In a war, it was not certain who had more people. If that was the case, wouldn't the great Ming Empire already be number 1 in the world? Moreover, these 4,000 cavalrymen were not alone. The other 3 regiments were also on their way. So much time had passed, and they would arrive at any moment. Once the main forces converged, they would no longer be defending, but attacking with all their might. At that time, the world's number 1 cavalry division would create another miracle on the battlefield. The 20,000 cavalry of the Allied army leaped out and began to form up in front of the main camp. After all, there were too many people, and the distance between the 2 sides was only 3 li. If they did not form up properly, they would not be able to charge out. Just like that, after the time it took for 2 incense sticks to burn, the 20,000 cavalry formed a fan that was 10 li wide. Just like that, all 20,000 cavalry were sent out of the main camp. After the battle formation was set up under Tung Mushi's orders, the war drums were beaten and the earth shook. Everyone listened to my orders. In this battle, no one is allowed to retreat before the gong sounds. Otherwise, you will be punished as a traitor. Before charging out, Tung Mushi had learned his lesson from the previous incident. He shouted loudly. In his opinion, the most difficult thing to do when facing the seven-star crossbow was to get close to the enemy. Once the two sides started fighting, their advantage in numbers would be displayed to the greatest extent. At that time, victory would belong to them. On the other hand, if everyone retreated, they would never be able to get close to the enemy. They would only become live targets and would not be able to escape the fate of being shot. Only advance and not retreat. This was the order that Tung Mushi gave to the 20,000 cavalry. Then, the war drums sounded, and the 20,000 cavalry launched a fierce charge on the ground that was 10 li wide. The war horses raised their hooves, kicking up countless snowflakes on the ground. At this moment, the world seemed to have turned into a vast expanse of white. It was so white that tens of meters away became a blind spot. Division Master, the enemy has finally launched an attack. Taemu's face was filled with excitement. Pass down the order. Split into companies and spread out on the same spot. Kill any enemy that tries to get close. At the same time, retreat as you fight. Don't fight head-on. Tianhu gave an order. After all, the disparity in numbers was too great. Once the enemy got close to them, it would be the first cavalry division's misfortune. Yes, although Taemu also wanted to fight to his heart's content with the enemy, he also knew that the bigger picture was more important. There was no doubt that Tianhu's order was the most appropriate at the moment. While the enemy's line of sight was obstructed, they could change their battle formation. Pass down the order. Split into companies and get into a crossbow attack formation. Spread out quickly and retreat as you fight. Don't get close to the enemy. After Taemu gave the order, the well-trained 4,000 soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division immediately split into 40 small teams. The distance between each team was not far, and the battle line was constantly widening. The Alliance army charging from afar did not know this. They only knew that the enemy was right in front of them. As long as they could charge through the enemy's crossbow formation and engage in close combat, victory would definitely belong to them. Therefore, at this moment, there was only one thought in their minds, and that was to charge. Under the galloping of tens of thousands of horses, the rumbling sound was incessant. It was as if an earthquake was about to happen. The rumbling sound filled the ears of every rider. At this moment, everyone seemed to have forgotten about life and death. They only charged out of instinct. The distance of only 3 miles was nothing to the cavalry. As they got closer and closer to the 5-Star Army's camp, the sound of crossbow arrows piercing through the air came one after another. With their line of sight obstructed, the soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division released their crossbows purely out of instinct. As long as they saw a moving figure rushing towards them, they would pull the trigger. The other soldiers hurriedly reloaded their crossbows when they had the time to ensure that their weapons could continuously attack and kill. Snow swirled in the air and blood splattered everywhere. There was a hint of red in the white and a hint of white in the red. This was like a painting, a ticket to hell. Amidst the snow, there were only flying crossbow arrows, flashing figures, and the urgent beating of the drums that they had to hear even if they didn't want to hear it. As they madly charged forward, they continuously retreated and released their crossbows, playing the battle song near the Ayla Mountain Pass. How is it? How is it? In the Alliance Army's camp, Tushi was anxiously looking around. Unfortunately, under the heavy snow, he could not see anything. On the other hand, General Tengmuxi, who was not far from him, was obviously much calmer. He only squinted his eyes as he looked at the scene in front of him. General Tengmuxi had been on the battlefield for a long time. He had spent his entire life in blood and fire and was used to seeing big scenes. He had even commanded bigger battles before. However, he did not know why, but at this moment, he was a little flustered. Perhaps it was because he could not see the situation clearly, or perhaps it was because he was afraid and did not understand the seven-star crossbow. As the saying goes, ignorance is the scariest. This is the truth. The battle was still going on. It had already been going on for close to an hour. The army had already gone far away. Other than the heavy snow under the hoofprints, nothing else could be seen. Why does it seem like they are moving towards us? It was unknown which young general said this unintentionally. It was this sentence that attracted everyone's attention. When everyone looked carefully, they discovered that the white snowflakes were indeed moving towards them. What's going on? What's going on? It was still Tushi who was the first to shout. If one listened carefully to his voice, they would be able to feel that at this moment, he was more or less panicking. General Tengmuxi was still squinting his eyes. No one knew what he was thinking. After a dozen breaths, when the snowflakes were less than 2 li away from their camp, he suddenly opened his eyes wide and roared. "Not good! Immediately close the camp gate! Close the camp gate!" You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.